On a fine day, a young lady stood quietly in the church, anxiously awaiting the arrival of her husband. Everyone present whispered among themselves, amazed by her ordinary face, as if forgetting that in front of them was the princess of the kingdom of Padania. She could barely contain her trembling, and the looks of those around her were filled with doubt and surprise. How could such a young, fragile woman become empress? They whispered among themselves, doubting the reality of what was happening, and knew that in the best-case scenario, she would be returned home within a week. The princess understood that if everything ended that simply, it would be a sign of mercy on the part of her husband. Jalora knew that her future husband had built his empire on a mountain of corpses. She was perfectly aware that she was dealing with a tyrant. Laura knew that if anyone stood in the emperor's way, he would kill them without hesitation, even if it was a family member. The princess understood that she had to move carefully along the route in order to live at least one more day. Meanwhile, the priest tensely watched those present, who were whispering, trying to find out when the emperor would arrive for the celebration. The young princess felt a throbbing pain in her leg due to her uncomfortable shoes. The man looked at the princess with a smirk, hinting that the emperor simply did not want to come. The count declared that Padania had suffered the humiliation of offering her princess, but with such treatment, they would certainly not remain silent. The young lady stood frozen for a moment, not knowing what to do. But soon she heard the door knock and was taken aback, immediately looking away. Looking into the distance, she noticed her future husband standing majestically in the middle of the hall. The emperor coldly warned that if the kingdom dared to make a noise, he would silence them instantly. Adil Slonia turned a menacing glance on the count, as if asking, "Does he really doubt his power?" At that moment, the entire hall held its breath, and the words stuck in the throat of everyone present. The count turned pale and, trembling with fear, tried to justify himself, realizing the hopelessness of his situation. The count quickly bowed to the emperor, acknowledging his greatness. But then he publicly announced that the neighboring kingdom, in its own interests, had offered a hostage in the form of a princess. The emperor did not respond to this statement. He simply calmly approached the priest and announced that the ceremony was about to begin. A moment later, the priest looked at everyone present with a smile and began to thank the gods for the beautiful couple. He added that he wanted to thank the gods for the opportunity to witness the moment when the two of them became husband and wife. Jalora, however, understood perfectly well that she had no bright future, because she was just a hostage. A few days ago, the maids in the kingdom were whispering about the substitution. They were afraid that if the emperor found out, his wrath would fall upon them. But it was impossible to send the real princess. They knew that the girl was just an orphan and wanted her to repay the debt, knowing full well that she was not destined to live long in the empire. The princess understood that she would never see happy days filled with love. The priest looked at them with a smile and asked to exchange rings. The emperor obediently reached for his. Then the priest called the princess, noticing her saddened look filled with tears. After his words, she was taken aback for a moment, but quickly came to her senses. The emperor looked intently at his companion and asked for her hand. Jalora, trembling like an autumn leaf, agreed and extended her hand. He quickly put the ring on her finger, but the princess noticed that he did not even touch her hand. Jalora reached for the ring obediently, shaking violently, and accidentally dropped it. She realized that she could not lift the ring. Her hands did not obey her. Jalora looked in surprise at the emperor, who quickly took the ring. For a moment, Jalora stared at him in a daze, as he himself put the ring on his finger. The priest announced with a smile that it was time for the ceremonial kiss. Jalora looked at the priest with a confused expression, not expecting this. He just smiled and said that this was the most important part of the wedding ceremony. The lady turned her gaze to the emperor and froze, noticing his menacing, piercing gaze. Smiling, Jalora asked him not to strain himself, but a moment later, she was taken aback when she saw him approaching her. The emperor bowed before his wife, and she looked at him in bewilderment. A few seconds later, he kissed her hand tenderly, kneeling. Without wasting a minute, he stood up and rushed towards the exit. His wife was surprised, but remained silent. A moment later, the empress breathed a sigh of relief, grateful to the emperor for not killing her on the spot. The emperor stood frozen for a moment, numb, smelling the scent of his wife, painfully familiar to him. For some time the young empress stared after him, unable to look away. That evening, Jalora sat quietly in her new room, immersed in a warm bath. enjoying a rare moment of peace. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and she was taken aback for a moment. The maid entered with a soft smile and left her nightgown on the bed. The Empress thanked her, trying to remain calm. As she approached the bed, the maid froze. Such a delicate, pleasant aroma emanated from the room that she could hardly help but wonder if the Empress was using aromatic oil. Jlora, accustomed to doing without a maid, calmly stated that she could manage on her own. The maid, surprised by the young Empress's determination, asked if she was sure. The Empress merely nodded, noting that she, too, needed rest. The maid did not object and obediently departed, leaving the room filled with quiet harmony and slight anxiety. After a warm bath, the young lady approached the bed and noticed a nightgown. Suddenly, Jalora was taken aback. The clothes were too revealing, and her blood ran cold from embarrassment. She knew that this night would be her wedding night, and her heart began to beat faster with anxious anticipation. Would the Emperor come to her? After changing, she went straight to bed and noticed that it was warm and soft. Flora was amazed and immediately stretched out on the bed. It was softer than the one she had slept on before, but soon she heard a noise outside the door and quickly sat up. After a few minutes of waiting, Jalora realized that she had heard other people's footsteps, not the Emperor's. Over time, she realized that he most likely would not come to her. At this point, the Empress sat quietly for a while and thought about her next steps. For this reason, she rose and walked over to a small table where she noticed a box tied with a ribbon. Opening the box, Jalora found a small neat scarf. For a moment, her gaze was fixed on the neatly folded handkerchief, and she wondered whether she should give it to the Emperor. Jalora remembered the moment a few days ago when the Queen asked if she was afraid. Trembling with fear, the young lady admitted that she was afraid because she had heard that the Emperor was a terrible person. The Queen sternly told her that she must keep her head up because she was a princess and would soon become an empress. The young lady thought that the marriage contract was like offering a gift. The Queen only smiled and said that the girl should not be stupid. She explained that the defeated nation had no choice but to offer the princess as a hostage, and that she was sending Jalora away in heartbreaking pain in place of her bedridden older sister. The Queen looked intently at Jalora and declared that their survival depended directly on her. With a predatory smile, she asked if the girl would be able to complete the mission. Trembling with fear, Jalora nodded and replied that she could handle everything. The young empress knew that she could visit her husband to present a wedding gift. Gathering her courage, she stepped into the corridor, shrouded in pitch darkness. Meanwhile, the emperor raged in his chambers. Rage and despair tore him apart from within. There was no cure. Adel was breaking everything around him, rage flashing in his eyes. Deafening wild shots thundered in my head, tearing apart my mind. Suddenly, he saw himself in a fire that was consuming his body and mind. A terrible scream was heard, and mountains of corpses passed before my eyes, like a procession of death. And suddenly everything became quiet. The pain went away, the vision dissolved. He stood frozen in place as a young lady appeared in front of him, smiling, holding flowers, calm and beautiful. The emperor was shocked, barely recognizing her, and uttered her name with trepidation, unable to look away. A moment later, the young empress entered the emperor's room. She was stunned. Everything was scattered around, and she could not understand what had happened. Julora called out to the emperor, wondering if anyone was there, as she had heard the noise earlier. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind made her shiver. Looking to the side, the empress realized that the wind had rushed through the broken window, scattering things around the room. Julora rushed to the window to close it, but a sudden noise made her turn around. The lady was stunned. The emperor appeared behind her and hugged her tightly. He stood holding his wife, and her scent gradually calmed his storm of emotions. The empress was stunned. Her heart was pounding. Her mind refused to comprehend what was happening. Jalora turned around again and met his gaze. Menacing, silent, chilling. She couldn't move, as if she herself had turned into a statue. She froze in horror. One wrong move and he could kill her. His heart was pounding, but he just hugged her, all the while inhaling Jalora's scent without saying a word. A moment later, the young empress could not bear it any longer and fainted. The emperor picked her up in his arms, feeling her body tremble. Adil saw his wife in front of him and finally came to his senses. His heart sank with surprise and anxiety. Quietly, almost carefully, he carried her to bed, laying her down carefully. For a few seconds, he stared at her, as if seeing a ghost of the past. He involuntarily mistook Jalora for Pefmelia, who had died years ago. Adil hurried to leave, but before he could take a step, he heard her quiet voice. He froze, turned around, and looked at his sleeping wife with surprise and trepidation, wondering if she wanted him to stay close. For some time, the emperor sat quietly next to his wife, watching her breathing. Suddenly, she grabbed his hand and squeezed out a few words in fear, as if the nightmare was haunting her even here. The emperor realized that his wife's fear had given birth to a nightmare, and her heart trembled with horror. Adil recoiled, confused, but his heart trembled. Why did she come to him in such fear? Suddenly, the familiar scent hit my nostrils again, awakening memories of my wedding night. Adil looked intently at Jalora. His lips tightened, his eyes softened. For a moment, his heart trembled, as if the whole world had frozen around him. Adil came closer, his heart beating faster, trying to catch the source of the smell. But a moment later, he pulled away, confusion and surprise flooding him, as his mind refused to explain this feeling. He sighed heavily and realized he was going crazy, even though the culprit was just the scent that had awakened the past in him. The next day, the Empress woke up to the bright sun, remembering that she had been next to the Emperor the previous night. She tried to understand how she returned to the room. Laura was puzzled and at first thought it was a dream, but she immediately dismissed that thought. Too much seemed impossible. The Empress remembered how his arms had squeezed hers last night, leaving an icy trail of fear. She remembered how his hand had squeezed hers, cold and powerful, leaving a mark on her soul that was impossible to forget. Jalora realized that if all this had been real, she would not have survived in his arms. A moment later, all her worries disappeared when Marie called out to the Empress with a smile. The Empress asked the maid how long she had been in the room, and learned that she had already been there when the Emperor returned her the previous night. Jalora was taken aback, as she did not expect the Emperor to bring her back himself, and she could hardly believe her ears. The maid, with a joyful smile and slight embarrassment, admitted that she remembered this moment very well. The Emperor tenderly embraced his wife, carrying her in his arms across the room, his every gesture radiating care and warmth. Marie could hardly contain her exclamations. It was incredibly romantic, because he looked at her with such unusual tenderness. The Empress was stunned. The tyrant himself carried her in his arms and allowed himself a gentleness that she had never even dreamed of. At that very moment, Jalora fell onto the bed with a crash, finally realizing that this was not a dream at all. The young man, carefully treating the Emperor's wounds, anxiously asked why he had not called him. The Emperor sighed heavily, revealing his chest, which was aching with pain and covered in abrasions and cuts. Adil looked at his subordinate with interest, trying to catch his opinion about the precious jewelry. The young man, without hiding his admiration, admitted that they were magnificent, and with slight surprise asked whether the gift was intended for Lady Evelyn. The Emperor calmly clarified that the jewels were intended only for the Empress, and Cesis noted that the Empress would certainly be charmed by such attention. Adil lingered his gaze on the jewelry, imagining how its shine would merge with the deep radiance of her eyes. He dressed slowly, giving his subordinate the order to deliver the jewels to the Empress. Without looking up, Adil also ordered to find out what scent Jalora had used last night. Meanwhile, Jalora anxiously sorted through the fragments of memories of her wedding night, trying to understand what was reality. Her thoughts were confused. Jalora remembered the coldness of his hands, but she couldn't remember how she ended up in her room. The maid shyly asked if the lady really didn't like her hairstyle, tearing her out of her heavy thoughts. Jalora blinked, realizing she had withdrawn too deeply into herself. Then she embarrassedly asked if it was really Marie who did this. Marie stood still as the Empress gently praised her work, sincerely noting her talent and taste. Tears glistened in the girl's eyes as she grabbed the Empress's hands and promised to show the world her true beauty. The maid, with a beaming smile, assured that the Empress was the most beautiful in the world. Laura looked at her in confusion, realizing that this opinion would collapse once the truth about her origins was discovered. Sadness clouded her gaze. The maid would certainly be disappointed to learn that the person in front of her was not a real princess. The surprised maid softly asked what was troubling her mistress. She sympathetically said that she understood her loneliness in a foreign country and sincerely wished her happiness. The maid smiled warmly and offered to consider her a friend to whom one could entrust any secrets. Jalora met her kind gaze with embarrassment, not expecting such sincerity. Having gathered her courage, She finally revealed her fears, and the maid's face noticeably changed. Sighing, the Empress admitted that she had lost consciousness from horror in front of her husband, and was sure that he now despised her. The maid understood that the servants still avoided the new Empress, so they hid many things related to the Emperor from her. She tried to protect the Empress from the previous horrors, reminding her that the Emperor is not angry only because of someone else's fear. With a gentle smile, she reminded him that fear of the Emperor only elevated him to the pedestal of a great ruler. The maid noted with a smile that many people fainted just by seeing the Emperor, and Jlora didn't have to worry about that. A moment later, she announced with a smile that she would bring the Empress jewelry that would match the outfit. Jlora watched the maid with a gentle slow smile, realizing that she was trying to cheer her up. The young Empress felt the weight of other people's fear and hatred, who condemned and avoided the Emperor. His heart strove only for happiness and love. Suddenly, painful memories of the angry looks and the brands that called her a monster came flooding back to her. She trembled, remembering the first time she was found covered in blood. Her hair dyed red, as if life itself had left her. Laura pushed aside all her disturbing thoughts, realizing that she was not a monster at all, and she felt that the Emperor was also lonely. After some time, the maid approached her mistress and apologized for not being able to find suitable jewelry. The Empress gently reassured her subordinate, realizing that the outfit was already beautiful without them. At that very moment, Jlora was taken aback when the Emperor's assistant knocked on the door of the room, completely unexpectedly for her. Marie came out with a smile, greeting the assistant, and Cecil smiled at the Empress, noticing that the Emperor had frightened her last night. He explained that he was therefore instructed to conduct a medical examination of the Empress, and also brought a luxurious gift for the Empress. The young maid noted with a joyful smile that the jewelry matched her outfit perfectly. Jlora reached for the jewelry shyly and cautiously asked if the Emperor had said anything else. Cesis spoke of the Emperor, his voice trembling with slight emotion, but a moment later he froze, struck by the Empress's confused look, eager to hear an answer. He noted with a slight smile that the Emperor would be sincerely pleased if the jewelry captured her gaze, emphasizing the depth of her eyes. The young lady felt both astonishment and relief, glad that the Emperor did not frown at her. Then the young man froze, overcome with bewilderment, capturing the special, enchanting scent of the Empress. After some time, he slowly returned to the Emperor, thinking about what had happened. But a moment later, he heard footsteps, turned around, and saw a young lady. He bowed, feeling genuine admiration and honor at meeting her. Evelyn responded to the young man's greeting with a soft smile, radiating the grace and dignity of a duke's daughter. Evelyn, with a gentle smile, asked if the young man had just left the Empress's room. Cesis confidently confirmed that he had been following the Emperor's orders. She was genuinely surprised by the Emperor's concern for his wife and asked if the Empress was ill, but the young man explained that this was only a formal test of the alliance with the kingdom. Evelyn looked at her companion with a slight, satisfied smile, feeling clarity and understanding of what was happening. She thanked him with a warm smile for his diligence, realizing that with such a reliable man, the Emperor was truly safe. Cesis bowed, modestly noting that he had only done what he had to. After some time, the young man returned to the Emperor and reported in detail what had happened, causing the Emperor to have slight doubts as to whether everything had really happened that way. Cesis confidently confirmed that everything was true. The Empress did not use any perfume or incense. He took a deep breath and immediately assured the Emperor that the Empress's enchanting scent was her natural gift, given to her from birth. The Emperor was genuinely surprised, wondering whether this enchanting aroma of the Empress was not her natural, innate gift. Cesis looked closely at the Emperor, noting that the Empress wanted to see him and probably convey something to him personally. The Emperor looked at the young man in surprise, struck by the thought that the Empress wanted to see him, despite her fear and fainting the previous night. Cesis, although discouraged and surprised, reported that the Empress wanted to personally thank the Emperor with a return gift. He explained that she was the princess of a neighboring kingdom, and if her goal was to harm the Emperor, Adil just smiled, asking if that wouldn't make things more intriguing. Adil grinned as he thought about what the Empress's fragile body could do, remembering the previous night and her helplessness in his arms. Meanwhile, the young Empress trembled as she tried on her new outfit and exquisite jewelry. Feeling like a true queen, she looked at the maid in surprise and asked shyly if her outfit was too extravagant. The maid noted with a slight smile that, when dealing with the empress could well wear such an outfit. Laura couldn't believe he had agreed to meet her after the events of the previous night. The maid asked the empress with concern whether she still felt afraid before meeting the emperor. The young empress declared with determination that she felt no fear of him at all. She looked down, admitting that the expensive gift had touched her, but she could not give anything worthy in return. Marie gently explained that sincerity was more important than cost, and with a smile, she handed the empress a small box containing a hand-sewn scarf, assuring her that the emperor would be touched by such a gift. This gift was not too ordinary. The maid, with a radiant smile, announced that she had come up with a truly unusual and interesting idea. The maid, with a satisfied smile, quietly whispered her brilliant plan into the empress's ear. The empress looked at the maid with embarrassment and surprise, cautiously asking whether the emperor would be angry about the delay in dinner. She assured the lady that she should not worry. Her husband was an inveterate workaholic and often skipped meals, so a small delay would hardly take him by surprise. Some time later, the emperor waited for his wife in the dining room in calm silence, impatiently tapping his fingers on the carved arm of his chair. At the same time, Cecile, the palace physician, and the emperor's faithful assistant, stood nearby, patiently waiting for the lady to appear. And Elan Josiah, the captain of the imperial guard, stood frozen at his post, straight as a steel shadow, also waiting for the empress. The emperor was surprised, because the dining room was very close, and he did not understand his wife's delay. Cesis assured that the empress was already on her way to them. He explained that the young empress was too fragile and therefore walked slowly. The emperor wondered if she was stalling for time out of fear of him. Soon the empress appeared in the hall and greeted the emperor. She bowed her head and gave him a warm, gentle smile. The emperor froze, struck by her radiant smile, for he had never seen such sincerity from her before. All those present watched the empress in amazement, blinded by her unexpected brightness. Jalora was confused, not understanding why everyone was so tense, and wondered if her greeting was strange. The emperor looked away and dryly reminded her that he had heard about her desire to give him a gift. Hearing this, the empress looked at him joyfully, as if forgetting about yesterday's fear. The emperor frowned, amazed that no one had ever looked at him with such a warm smile before. Jalora felt embarrassed, feeling his heavy gaze, and froze for a moment in awkwardness. Adil sighed and asked his wife to come closer and give him the promised gift. The empress obediently walked towards him at a slow pace, hiding her hands behind her back, as if guarding her little surprise. Elon watched the empress warily, touching the hilt of her sword because of her origin. Laura noticed their anxiety and felt the air around them become heavy and tense. The emperor looked angrily at his wife, demanding to know what she wanted to tell him. The young lady trembled with fear, unable to find words under his stern and oppressive gaze. She quickly handed him a bouquet of flowers she had picked that morning, stunning everyone present. Then the empress showed a carefully hand-sewn scarf that she wanted to give yesterday. Laura admitted to herself that her simple gifts could not compare to the luxury of jewelry from her husband. However, she sincerely wanted to thank the emperor, despite her own timidity. The emperor was struck by her embarrassed presentation of the gifts and the sincerity that could be read in them. The knight let out a barely perceptible breath, feeling the tension leave his chest at the thought that the empress meant no harm. The emperor's assistant felt relieved after what had happened. The young empress smiled timidly at her husband, hoping with all her heart that he would accept her modest but sincere gift. Relief trembled inside her as she decided to forget the knight's fear and try to get closer to him. The emperor looked at the bouquet in surprise, amazed that the flowering in the garden had begun so unexpectedly. Jalora softly admitted that the flowers had only recently bloomed, and there was a quiet pride in her voice. She gently reminded her husband that he was too immersed in work to notice such small details. Mustering up all her fragile courage, Jalora suggested that they take a walk together and look at these delicate flowers. Adil froze, because in her shining gaze, he unexpectedly saw a reflection of the one who was once dear to him. His hand trembled involuntarily, reaching out to her, but he quickly stopped, realizing that in front of him was his wife, and not a shadow of the past. Moments later, the empress sat quietly at the table, painfully wondering if she had imagined that the emperor had smiled. The lady quickly pushed the thought away, deciding that her imagination was playing tricks on her again due to her excitement. Adil calmly noted that in their warm empire, flowers grew all year round, and gently suggested that she was already tired of seeing them. He was genuinely surprised by her desire to walk with him and admire the garden again. Jlora said with a warm smile that she would be happy to accompany him any time if he allowed it. At that moment, she noticed a quiet, rare tenderness on his face, as if hidden from everyone. Adil nodded briefly and said that they would definitely go for a walk when he had a free hour. Her heart trembled, because this soft smile seemed almost unreal, and she was afraid to believe it was true. A second later, an exquisite delicacy was placed in front of her, and she involuntarily gasped at its beauty and sophistication. Todor looked at the Empress with a slight smile, introducing himself and expressing the honor of preparing dinner for her. He reported that he had prepared a traditional dish, and the Empress warmly thanked him for his concern. The servants watched her carefully as she tasted the food, with bated anticipation of her verdict. The Emperor frowned, watching his wife closely, his eyes keeping a wary, cold look. Jlora beamed and said that the dish was simply delicious, which made everyone happy, after which she was given more desserts. The Emperor looked away, silent and focused, sensing the danger if something went wrong. Adil understood that even the slightest mistake could cost the Empress her life right there in the hall. Despite this, she talked to the servants, surprisingly relaxed and at ease. Adil noted her calm and wondered if she hadn't noticed how the knight carefully kept his hand on his sword. The Empress suddenly realized that she had become carried away by her meal and wondered whether she should start a conversation with her husband. She looked away and gathered her courage, looking at the Emperor, preparing her first words. At that moment, the chef served her an exquisite dessert, as if to cap off the meal. Jlora looked at the delicacy in surprise, but quickly accepted it, not noticing how the Emperor angrily watched the cook. She slowly sipped her dessert, savoring every bite, until memories from the past surfaced in her head. She froze for a moment, and light tears rolled down her cheeks, causing a tender sadness. The chef apologized with concern, believing that the dessert might not be suitable for a foreign empress. Jlora smiled through her tears, assuring him that the dessert was so delicious that it brought her to tears of happiness. Todor paused for a moment, his eyes shining with joy, for his efforts had received sincere gratitude. The Empress glanced furtively at her husband and wondered whether it was worth resuming the conversation with him. Laura knew that he valued silence, so she decided to remain silent so as not to disturb his peace. She enjoyed her dessert, putting all thoughts aside. While the Emperor continued to look at her with cold indignation, Cesis sighed heavily and looked away, not wanting to witness the tense scene. Deep down, he quietly hoped that love and patience would help the Emperor and Empress find harmony and a long life together. Cesis came closer to the table, apologized, and quietly asked what exactly the Empress wanted to tell the Emperor. The Emperor looked closely at his wife, assessing her words and praising his assistant for his thoughtfulness. Jlora looked away, embarrassed, and timidly asked if he wanted to go for a walk after the meal. She smiled and added that he was probably busy with work, and she shouldn't have distracted him. Cesis gently informed him that the Emperor did not have much to do today, and a walk in the garden was quite possible. The Emperor sighed heavily, agreeing, because his assistant's words seemed convincing to him. Adil approached his wife, extended his hand, and with a slight smile, asked if she wanted to go right now. Jlora accepted his offer shyly, her heart beating timidly faster. At this time, the young lady was tending the flowers in the garden, enjoying the silence and the aroma of the plants. The maid hurried to her mistress and quietly whispered something in her ear, causing a slight stir. Evelyn beamed with joy and asked if everything the maid had said was true. She was delighted that the Emperor himself came to the garden to admire the flowers with her. The Empress hurried after her husband, but her high heels and calluses on her feet prevented her from catching up with him. Jlora suddenly remembered the mentor with the whip, and her menacing voice about patience echoed in her mind again. The young Empress realized that she had to endure everything for her own safety and survival. She noticed that the Emperor had stopped, and, fighting the pain, she rushed towards him through the silence of the garden. Running up, the lady saw his intense gaze, motionless and silent, which was both surprising and frightening. Adil involuntarily noticed her legs. He noticed that the high heels made his gait fragile and risky. Jlora gathered her strength and continued walking, trying to keep her step light and confident despite her fatigue. The emperor continued to walk beside her, his steps slowing as if he were adjusting to her rhythm and caution. They walked through the garden slowly, every sound of the leaves and the scent of the flowers creating a light, almost magical atmosphere. The empress felt his presence nearby. His attention and slow pace made her heart bolder. Jalora walked leisurely next to the emperor, enjoying the silence of the garden and the secret joy of being able to admire the flowers together. Suddenly, a young, beautiful lady with a radiant smile appeared in their path, and Jalora felt a slight thrill at the emperor's attention. Evelyn looked at the emperor with a joyful smile, amazed that she had met him in such an unexpected place, and addressed him casually. At that moment, she became embarrassed, realizing that he was now the emperor, and the usual address became impossible. Without wasting a minute, she politely greeted the empress, observing all the rules of palace etiquette. Adil watched the lady closely, realizing that her manners required correction, and demanded that she raise her head. The empress looked at Evelyn in surprise, realizing the young lady's high status and her bold frankness. When Evelyn looked away at the empress, her gaze was light and casual, but at the same time attentive. Jalora was taken aback, confused, and not knowing how to properly answer and introduce herself to the young lady. Evelyn grabbed Jalora's hand and with a radiant smile, as if checking, in front of her was a real princess from a neighboring kingdom. The empress froze for a moment, feeling a slight pain, but the smile warmed her internally and confirmed Evelyn's words. Evelyn introduced herself according to all the rules of court etiquette, openly stating that she had been a friend of the emperor since childhood, and that their friendship gave her courage. The emperor looked sternly at his friend, reminding her of his wife's status and the need for more polite treatment. Evelyn puffed out her cheeks, struck by his sternness, but the empress only smiled, considering it a trifle. Coming closer, Evelyn hugged the empress's hand, noting the emperor's gentleness and kindness, which she noticed for the first time. She noticed an exquisite necklace on the empress, and then she admired its beauty, as if it were a work of art. Evelyn smiled and noted with interest that it could have been a gift from the emperor himself, emphasizing his care. The empress froze, slightly embarrassed, confirming Evelyn's guess and feeling a thrill of inner joy. Evelyn pulled away with a smile, glad that the emperor was actually showing attention and affection to his wife. Evelyn, looking sideways at the empress, noted with sadness and melancholy the emperor's coldness towards her. The emperor looked menacingly at his friend, wondering how long she intended to hold on to her resentment. She smiled, noticing his anger, and noted that he was angry with her again. The empress smiled as she looked at the young people, realizing their closeness and friendly affection. Jalora looked at her husband with embarrassment, dreaming of one day joking with him just as openly. She called out to him, but the words stuck in her throat, leaving only a slight feeling of confusion. The young lady ran up to the emperor with a smile, reminding him that he had never joined her on her walks. The emperor turned quickly as he walked away, and Evelyn tried to ask if he was being too cold. His menacing gaze and words seemed to cut the air, making the young empress feel superfluous. Evelyn ran after him quickly, asking about the emperor's policies and upcoming actions. Jalora was puzzled and embarrassed, realizing that she would not be able to join their lively conversation. Sometime later, the young empress sat quietly in her room after an unsuccessful walk with her husband. Marie, noticing the blood on her dress, froze for a moment, then carefully asked if the lady was injured. The empress assured her that everything was fine, but the maid felt that she was lying, seeing her anxiety. Jalora explained that these were just blisters from her shoes, looking at the maid in surprise. The maid was taken aback, and with tears in her eyes, apologized for her excitement, feeling guilty. The empress gently reassured her, saying that it was not her fault. At that very moment, the maid ran out of the room, deciding to immediately call the doctor, ignoring Jalora's protests. The empress was shocked, but barely had time to notice the servant's concern in the palace. A few moments later, the imperial doctor arrived and hastily asked if she was injured. Laura apologized with a smile, explaining that she was fine and it was just a misunderstanding. The maid was alarmed, and the doctor offered to examine her, not wanting to leave the question unanswered. Jalora froze for a moment, seeing the young man kneeling before her, admiring his grace. Cesis looked at her closely and assured her that he would be very careful and gentle with her. Cesis examined the empress and noted that the inflammation was severe and the wound had been damaged again before it had healed. He prepared to apply antiseptic to prevent infection. The young empress looked nervously at the doctor, humbly asking him to do whatever was necessary. Cesis warned that it might hurt a little, and Jalora felt a slight tingling sensation. She noticed the kindness in his gaze and calmed down a little. Cesis asked why she hadn't said anything yet, as if she was upset with him. Jalora looked away and quietly admitted that she thought it wasn't worth the attention. The doctor sighed and apologized, considering the walk with the emperor his fault. Jalora screamed, realizing that it was she who was at fault, not him. He realized that she didn't want to discuss the incident anymore, so he decided to finish his work with urine. After some time, the young man visited the emperor and told him everything, causing him surprise. He asked whether what had happened was really a serious incident. Cesis confirmed that the situation was serious. The wound was at risk of bacterial infection and required rest. The emperor was furious, not understanding why Jalora remained silent about what had happened. He was at a loss as to what to do in this situation. Adil wondered why she didn't just tell him everything. The young empress sat quietly in the room, enjoying the long-awaited rest. She looked at her bandaged legs with a slight smile, wondering if the doctor had been too harsh with her. Jalora wasn't worried about her health. She was more concerned with what the emperor had been doing in recent days. She assumed he might be admiring the flowers in the garden with the Evelyns. This thought seemed logical, because he was bored with his wife. Laura really wanted to see the emperor, not suspecting that he, bypassing all the servants, was already heading towards her. The maids were talking among themselves, noticing that the emperor had returned to his office again and was not going to rest for the night. They understood that he had been irritated and tense in recent days, so they tried to be extremely careful when caring for him. Entering the office, the emperor anxiously asked his knight how the empress was doing. After what happened, he was worried about his wife, but did not show his emotions to anyone. Elon, looking at him with quiet confidence, assured him that the empress had not gone anywhere and was calmly recovering in her room. Adil, frowning slightly, asked the knight if her doctor was still taking care of her every day. The knight nodded and gently suggested that the emperor visit his wife if anxiety still gnawed at him. The words caused a storm of emotions in the emperor, and rage immediately flared in his eyes. Elon sighed quietly and explained that his lord had always been concerned about the empress's well-being, so any concern was completely natural. The emperor, clenching his jaw, stated that it was she who had chosen to endure the pain, and his subordinate spoke as if he had made her suffer and mocked her. Adil immediately said firmly that he was ready to visit her himself and make sure that everything was okay with her. At the same time, the maid asked the empress if she felt depressed because she had been sitting in a locked room for several days. She sighed and stated that it was so, and Marie suggested that she go outside, declaring that she would carry the lady on her back. The maid said that the mistress should not worry, because she was very strong and could do something like that. Jalora insisted that such a thing was simply impossible, but she still knew that if she refused, the maid would be very upset. For this reason, she agreed, and a moment later the maid was carrying her mistress on her back, although it was very heavy. After a few steps, Marie stumbled, and the young empress flew to the ground along with her maid. To their regret, they fell to the ground with a crash, and the emperor and the knight entered the room and noticed an absurd picture. The maid was taken aback and asked her mistress for forgiveness, as she had not expected anything like this. But a moment later, she looked away in shock, hearing someone's footsteps. The emperor looked at them with fury and asked what they were doing. The empress immediately looked at the emperor in surprise and called him. He quickly grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him, and also asked how long she planned to sit on the floor. He was momentarily taken aback as he smelled her wonderful scent again, and without wasting a minute, he picked her up and declared that until the injury was completely healed, she was not allowed to go outside without his permission. Meanwhile, the young knight was helping the maid to get up. The emperor looked menacingly at his subordinates and declared that they must leave. The maid was very scared, but the knight calmed her down. A moment later, the emperor threw his wife into bed with a bang. He came closer to her and took her hand, all the while keeping his fierce gaze on her. Adil looked at his wife with fury and stated that something had been bothering him for some time. The young empress was frightened and did not understand what had happened. He grabbed her hands and angrily declared that she must answer honestly, because if she lied, he would kill her on the spot. She was extremely frightened and confused, and wondered if he had found out who she really was. Adil looked at her in surprise, amazed that the scent he had smelled earlier had suddenly disappeared, as if it had dissolved into thin air. Adil stated with barely concealed alarm that she knew what he was called behind his back by those who feared him more than life itself, and with a trembling voice, he asked if she knew what happened when his anger flared up. He asked if that was the reason she had remained silent all this time, squeezing her throat, and the young lady, trembling with fear, managed to squeeze out that he had understood everything wrong. His gaze became piercing, and his throat tightened. He reminded her of the old injury on her leg, noting that she had walked with him through the entire garden without saying a word about the pain. Rage filled his eyes, and he couldn't understand why she had hidden the truth for so long. At that moment, his gaze changed. A mocking grin appeared on his lips, and he asked with caustic irony if she really thought he was just a bloodthirsty tyrant. The young lady trembled with fear, standing powerless, unable to utter a word. She remembered the teacher who had sternly told her that endurance was a virtue, and her heart sank at the memory. Jalora was scared to the point of shaking, but she knew she had to accept the difficulties, as she had been taught since childhood. She was constantly told that she should not become a cause of inconvenience to others, and this poisoned her every step. So, even when hunger was eating her up from the inside, she kept silent. Even when the temperature rose, she endured every tremor in her body. Even with bleeding wounds, she remained silent, and patience became her second nature, a habit, an almost imperceptible pain. Then she couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears, squeezing out through her tears that she simply didn't want to be the one who brought suffering to others. The emperor was taken aback, struck by the revelation, not believing that he was hearing it from her personally. Then he let her go. And Laura, with tears in her eyes, admitted that everything happened not because of mistrust of him, but because of fear of causing inconvenience. She said that she was looking forward to meeting him and wanted to stay close at least for a little while, so she kept silent, hiding her feelings. The emperor, shocked, asked in surprise if she really wanted to be with him, and his voice trembled. Jalora, with a slight, embarrassed smile, looked at her husband and quietly admitted that they were a married couple, and her heart fluttered. He looked away, embarrassment clouding his face, realizing that she had opened up to him completely, although he had not expected to hear such sincere words. A moment later, a dead, icy silence hung between them, as if time had stopped. Laura looked at her husband intently, her voice shaking with horror and alarm as she asked if he still intended to kill her. He looked at her coldly and said that he was still thinking about it. And Laura was stunned. Her heart was pounding, and she begged him to give an honest answer. The emperor, stunned and at the same time amazed by her courage, could hardly contain his anger, asked her not to say such a thing and not to cry, while his eyes with piercing severity asked if she should not be strong in spirit. He looked at her for a moment, bewildered, shocked, and confused, as if his own rage was clashing with her fragile courage, and he could not find the words to calm her. Adil sighed heavily, his lips pressed together and his eyes filled with worry, as he tried to figure out how he was supposed to calm the crying, trembling woman. Meanwhile, the maid, standing behind the door, tears rolled down her cheeks. Her voice trembled as she quietly said that the empress's leg hurt. The emperor himself was pressing on it, and she felt terribly sorry for her mistress. Her heart was breaking from helplessness. After some time, the emperor asked his wife if she had stopped crying, because he did not know how to calm her down, and was simply waiting for her to come to her senses. Jlora, with a tear-stained face, looked at the emperor and declared that it was so, while quietly asking for forgiveness. The emperor was taken aback by her look and appearance, because he had never seen anything like it before. He was puzzled and understood that if his subordinate found out that he had brought the empress to tears, he would certainly scold him. Then the emperor declared that he would not kill her, but asked her not to tell the doctor what had happened, and he tenderly took her legs, placing them on his knees, and began to carefully massage them. Jalora looked at the emperor in surprise, as she was shocked by his actions. Adil stated that such manipulations would improve her well-being a little. She looked at him in bewilderment and softly stated that she was in a little pain. Adil immediately jumped away from his wife and was taken aback, as he did not expect that he could hurt her, because when he had a headache, he constantly massaged his head, and everything went away. Laura, with a gentle smile, asked her husband if he really thought the massage had a pain-relieving effect. Adil was extremely embarrassed and asked in surprise what she was laughing at. She smiled and stated that external injuries could be treated with medication every day. Adil looked at her and said that she should have told him something like that earlier. She was lucky, because he hadn't asked her about something like that before. The emperor looked closely at his wife and stated that it seemed that she trusted Cecil very much. Jlora was unable to utter a word because her husband was too close. He caught her, as he saw that she was about to fall, and held her in his arms, seeing his wife in a very piquant form. He looked away with embarrassment and asked her what she would do if she fell out of bed again and got hurt. She was extremely embarrassed, as she could clearly hear the emperor's heartbeat. Adil was taken aback for a moment as he again smelled the scent that had previously disappeared. He held her tightly for a while and enjoyed the scent. Unable to bear the overwhelming emotions, he pulled her closer, wanting to fully enjoy the pleasant scent. But a moment later, he pulled away from her and embarrassedly stated that they were still different. At the same time, he looked at his wife with bewilderment and slight indignation as he noticed that she had fallen asleep. He was extremely surprised and did not understand how she managed to fall asleep at such a moment, assuming that she perhaps did not see him as a man at all. For some time he looked at his sleeping wife, as if enchanted. Adil looked at her in bewilderment as she quickly fell asleep alone with the man, and he guessed that there was not a grain of caution in her. He pulled away from her, embarrassed, and wondered if that meant she really trusted him. That same night, the man ran to the emperor in a hurry, as he had been summoned in the middle of the night, and he nervously wondered if he had done something wrong. The man knocked timidly on the door and asked the emperor if he had called him. The emperor did not answer the man and continued calmly cleaning his weapon. He stared at the blade and noticed that his subordinate was trembling with fear. Michel, trembling, carefully asked the ruler what his orders were at such a late hour. Adil put down his weapon and told his subordinate that he wanted to ask him one question. Trembling with fear, Michel asked what exactly the emperor was talking about. Adil looked menacingly at his subordinate and seriously asked whether every noble lady's shoe caused blisters. The man was momentarily taken aback by such a question and wondered if the emperor had really called him at night just for this reason. But at that very moment, he cast aside unnecessary thoughts and decided that the ruler was simply checking his work. Michel smiled nervously and hastened to answer, after which he told about taking measurements and making shoes for noblewomen. With a slight smile, he added that when done correctly, such things do not cause complications. At this point, the emperor realized that there was something very strange about the matter, and he could not understand why the princess of another country was wearing shoes that did not suit her. Asking himself this question, Adil came to the conclusion that there were too many suspicious moments in what was happening. Michel trembled with fear and thought that perhaps the emperor did not like his answer. Adil looked closely at the ruler and, plucking up his courage, cautiously asked if he was going to give someone new shoes. Adil looked at his subordinate with complete seriousness and declared that he should find out what models were currently popular among noble women and make 100 pairs of shoes for the empress. The man was momentarily taken aback by the unexpectedness, as he had not expected such an order, and the emperor coldly asked if he really thought such a quantity of shoes was excessive. Michel admitted, perplexed, that it was not only a matter of the number of pairs, since the production of so many shoes required time, skill, and the enormous efforts of the palace's best craftsmen. Adil looked at his subordinate with fury and demanded that he stop making any excuses, ordering him to start work immediately without delay. Michel, trembling with fear, acknowledged the need to first take the empress's foot measurements and cautiously asked when this would be possible. Adil sighed heavily and reminded them that the empress had an injured leg, so the measurements would have to be postponed until she recovered. Then the emperor, visibly embarrassed, offered to determine the size of the empress's foot from the palm of his hand, trying to speak as calmly as possible. Averting his awkward gaze from his subordinate, he described in detail with a pounding heart the shape and intricacies of his wife's graceful leg. Michel was shocked by what he heard and did not understand how the ruler could know such details, because an ordinary man rarely noticed such things. However, he quickly pulled himself together and assured that the craftsman would immediately begin making several pairs of shoes for the empress. With a slight smile, Michel confidently stated that the master remembered the empress's foot size perfectly and could easily make suitable shoes for her. At that moment, the man realized that the emperor and empress seemed to be really getting along and soon these rumors spread throughout the empire at breakneck speed. The Duke's domain was in chaos, with the young lady furiously destroying everything in her path. Evelyn, seething with anger, screamed that the Empress was truly terrible. She was truly shocked to learn that the Emperor had sent his wife many gifts. Seeing them, she stopped her gaze on one of the necklaces with admiration. Evelyn pressed the necklace to her body in embarrassment and asked the Emperor if it matched her outfit. But, turning her attention to him, she noticed that the Emperor did not look up from his documents and did not even respond. She was furious, trying to get his attention, but he did not respond to her efforts. Her rage increased when she noticed the same necklace on the Empress. Evelyn understood that such things could not be left unanswered, and she resolutely decided to get rid of her rival. A moment later, she burst into her father's office, full of determination and fury. The Duke greeted his daughter with a joyful smile. Like a caring father, he quickly ran up to her, hugging her with warmth and tenderness. But she stopped him and firmly stated that she was no longer a child and had come with an important request. The Duke joyfully exclaimed that he was ready to listen to any of her requests. Evelyn glared at her father and firmly declared that the Empress must be eliminated. The Duke was taken aback, struck by such an abrupt statement from his daughter. He sighed heavily and asked his daughter to return to the room, explaining that he had a mountain of work ahead of him. Evelyn grabbed her father's hand and tried to hold him back, knowing that this decision would be unpleasant for him. He looked at her menacingly and declared that the current empress was the princess of a neighboring kingdom, and it was simply impossible to act against her. Evelyn was shocked by his words, because he had previously told her something completely different. Some time ago, he claimed that only she could become empress, but now the young lady saw her dream slipping away, as another took its rightful place. With tears in her eyes, Evelyn asked her father if he would just sit and watch as the princess took the throne. The Duke rushed to his daughter and tried to calm her down. He sighed heavily, agreed with her with a puzzled expression, and promised to find a way. Evelyn begged her father to hurry, fearing that the emperor would fall in love with the empress. But she declared that the princess was only a tribute, and the emperor would never truly love her. Evelyn looked away and said with alarm that the emperor had not only given her jewelry, but had also supplied her with various things. The Duke stepped back and asked if the emperor hadn't had a headache for a long time. She was taken aback when she confirmed this, but promised to check everything with the doctor. He said with a smile that he should let her know if he found anything interesting, but for now he should not show hostility towards the empress. Evelyn sighed heavily and asked if her father really wanted her to get closer to the empress. She admitted that talking in the garden with the empress was tiring, but the Duke insisted that she be a good girl and follow his instructions. Marie thanked the doctor with a smile for his work, feeling the warmth and sincerity in his every movement, and he only smiled modestly. Moments later, she knocked on the door and informed the empress of the doctor's arrival, her heart pounding with excitement. Cesis, entering the room, was taken aback for a moment. Seeing the empress, who was smiling radiantly at him, he bowed his head sheepishly and greeted her back, feeling a slight tremor in his chest. After some time, he began to examine the empress, carefully watching her every movement. Jlora asked if there would be a need to change the bandages again today, slightly embarrassed. He explained that the wound had already healed and bandages were no longer needed, but the ointment still needed to be continued to be applied. The young empress was sincerely glad to hear such news. Her heart was filled with warmth. The young man looked at her in surprise, struck by how brightly and joyfully her smile shone. Cesis looked away, embarrassed, and said that he would now remove the next bandage. But moments later, the empress was taken aback when she heard her husband's voice, smiling as he asserted that her mood was better than usual. The lady was extremely surprised, not expecting to see him in the room. Jlora looked at the emperor in surprise, trying to understand how long he had been standing at the door. He came closer and menacingly noted that she had just been happy and smiling joyfully, but when he appeared, the smile immediately disappeared. The young empress was taken aback, noting that her surprise was caused by her husband's sudden visit. Adil, looking at his wife, said that there was no need to be surprised, since the husband had come to visit his wife. He sighed heavily and said that they could ignore him and continue what they had started. Cesis looked at the ruler in bewilderment, but added that he would continue to apply the medicine. The emperor watched his subordinate closely for some time, but he didn't like the way he tenderly courted his wife. Unable to bear it any longer, the emperor approached his subordinate and glared at him menacingly. For some time, the young man worked despite the tense situation. Ceases, looking at the emperor, asked whether he would take power upon himself. The emperor was shocked by such a question. The empress was taken aback, noting that he could not apply the medicine himself. Adele asked his wife with anger and indignation who made such a decision. She was taken aback and did not know what to say. Then the emperor sat down in front of his wife and declared that if they insisted, he would do it himself, pushing his subordinate aside. The young empress was extremely embarrassed, but agreed. Jalora looked at her dear husband in surprise and trembled with every touch. She watched him with embarrassment and enjoyed the process. At that very moment, the emperor froze in shock and embarrassment, feeling the intensifying scent emanating from his wife. The empress was extremely embarrassed by his actions. Some time later, the young man came to the emperor and stated that he noticed a strange smell coming from the empress during the treatment. He noted that the scent was especially noticeable when he was caring for her. However, after the arrival of the emperor, the smell weakened. When the emperor applied the medicine to the empress, the aroma intensified again. As they discussed the situation, they realized that the strength of the scent changed depending on her emotions. Ceases suggested trying one method, but the emperor asked what it was about. With a smile, Ceases said that the emperor should simply do what the empress would like. He invited them to spend time together. Then the emperor looked menacingly at his subordinate. The emperor became furious and asked whether his subordinate had forced him to adapt to his wife's wishes. Ceases explained that it was not that simple. The emperor had to deepen the relationship, because even today they had done well. The emperor could not stand it and sternly threw his subordinate out of the office. As he left, the young man declared that such manipulations would ease his headaches. Ceases wanted the emperor to take it seriously, but he only threw the documents at him in anger. The emperor was puzzled because the assistant was expressing ridiculous ideas. Sometime later, the empress was walking in the garden with a maid, and Marie joyfully thanked her for her patience during the restoration. Jalora thanked her maid with a smile for the care she had shown her all this time. Maria said she was glad that the empress was no longer wounded, and was happy that, thanks to her, the emperor had changed. Jalora looked at the maid in surprise and asked if the emperor had really changed. Maria smiled and confirmed that this was so. She added that she had never seen such an expression on the emperor's face before. Marie, her eyes shining, remembered how the emperor tenderly courted his wife and realized that he was not indifferent to her. The empress was extremely embarrassed and asked the maid not to joke like that, realizing that the emperor could not treat her differently. She knew that if he knew who she really was, he would kill her without hesitation, and that wanting to win his heart was a luxury she was not allowed to have. Marie asked her mistress in surprise why she thought so, since she was beautiful and very suitable for the emperor. The empress looked away from her and could not utter a word. The maid was taken aback and asked her mistress if she had really heard all the unpleasant rumors about the emperor. Laura, to her regret, could not answer such a question. The maid could not stand it and immediately declared that all the rumors were lies, and the empress should not trust them. The empress was taken aback and declared that in her kingdom they said that the emperor was a tyrant. From rumors she learned that he was cruel and killed people without hesitation. It was even said that he killed his own brother for the throne. Marie screamed that such rumors were pure lies. She looked at the lady intently and stated that if the rumors were true, he would have killed countless people like her by now. At first glance, he seemed very serious and unapproachable, but in reality, he had a kind heart, which he did not show to everyone. The empress remembered that on the first night he was frightening, but after talking, he seemed gentle. After some time, the empress told the maid that the emperor would return to her and she did not need to change her clothes, although the maid thought otherwise. She understood that he would most likely spend the night with his wife, and the empress should not let him go. The young maid, with embarrassment, prepared beautiful clothes for the empress for the night. Jalora looked at the dress with bewilderment and confusion, and asked how it could be called clothing. Marie hurried her mistress, knowing that the emperor would arrive at any moment. The young empress obediently changed her clothes, but was extremely embarrassed by her outfit. Entering the room, she asked the maid if the outfit was really normal. Marie said with a smile that the empress was the most beautiful in the world, and added that there was a matching cloak to go with the outfit. She said with a smile that when the mood reached its peak, the cloak should be removed. Jalora looked at the maid in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. Marie thought for a moment, but then she said that when they brought their faces closer to each other, their mood would reach its climax. Then the maid introduced them to a piquant scene like in a novel. The Empress looked at the maid with confusion and stated that she definitely knew her business. Marie smiled and stated that this was true, and it was all thanks to the secret weapon. A moment later, she reached into her secret pocket and declared that the Empress would be delighted with something like this. She joyfully presented the Empress with the romantic scriptures, also more commonly known as a love manual. She looked at the lady with a smile and declared that this was the most practical and popular book in the empire. After all, thanks to the guidance of this book, she and her friends found their happiness. The Empress looked closely at the book, as she realized that something like this would be very useful for her. She became immersed in reading, but after a moment she was taken aback, as it described very piquant details of happiness. Marie told the mistress that she must definitely read the book, but the Empress was embarrassed and thanked the maid for such things. That same evening, the Emperor came to his wife's room, and she greeted him with a joyful smile. Moments later, she stood up and walked towards the Emperor, showing him her exquisite outfit. Adil looked at his wife in surprise and asked if he had really made her wait. Jalora sheepishly stated that this was not true. At the same time, she asked why he came to her. The Emperor timidly stated that he had something he wanted to give her. He gave the order, and the maids entered the room, presenting the Empress with many beautiful shoes. He looked closely at his wife and stated that she had blisters on her feet due to wearing poor quality shoes. So he asked the courtiers to make her shoes that were the latest fashion and comfortable. He announced that the rest would arrive a little later, and the Empress asked in surprise whether this meant there would be even more shoes. Adil calmly confirmed this, but asked if that was really a problem. She was shocked, thinking it was too much, but he reminded her that she was a princess and this was to be expected. At that very moment, the Emperor pulled his wife closer and sat her down in a chair, which she had not expected at all. Laura sheepishly stated, looking at her husband, that she could handle it herself, but he ignored her words. A moment later, he began to put his wife's shoes on. A moment later, the young lady showed the gift to the Emperor with a smile, amazed by the beautiful shoes that she had never worn before. Adil looked at his wife with a gentle and contented smile and noted that the shoes suited her very well. She shuddered as she recalled sitting in the damp, cold room while the maid contemptuously threw several pairs of shoes at her. The maid, mockingly and maliciously, declared that the girl should be grateful because she was a nobody to everyone. The young lady, as usual, took this with restraint and did not answer the maid, hiding her emotions. But soon she could not bear it and burst into tears, causing confusion in the Emperor, who did not understand the reason for her tears. In a panic, he quickly asked if she didn't like the shoes he had given her. Adil anxiously asked if it was painful for her because the size was wrong, but she remained silent. Adil was stunned and did not understand why she was crying, and the young lady only timidly asked for forgiveness. The Emperor asked what he needed to do to stop her from crying, but suddenly he clearly smelled her scent. Jalora, plucking up her courage, asked the Emperor to hug her. He was stunned by what he saw, as the shawl fell from her shoulder, revealing her in a new light. For some time the Emperor looked at his wife, as if enchanted, while experiencing great embarrassment. The lady knew she had to follow the book's instructions. She looked at him with embarrassment and asked if this was normal. He didn't say a word, but he put his arms around her and pulled her closer, feeling how her scent had changed. Adil knew he was holding her like that only to test her scent. Jalora thanked the Emperor for this with a gentle smile and slight embarrassment. Looking at her husband, she realized that the love manual really worked. Then the Emperor passionately declared that they were spouses, and now she could call him by his name. The Empress tried to pronounce his name with trepidation and excitement, surprised at her own courage. Adil could not resist and, burning with desire, pulled his wife closer and kissed her tenderly. A moment later, he passionately laid her on the bed, overcome by a storm of emotions, and began hot kisses. He kissed every inch of her body, and the young lady trembled with delight, embarrassment, and confusion, not knowing what to do next. Adil stopped his passionate kisses and, with anxiety in his eyes, stated that she could stop him at any moment. She looked away in embarrassment, but admitted with trepidation that she didn't want him to stop, and Adil understood her. At that moment, he began passionate kisses again, his touches full of tenderness and care. He touched his wife with trepidation and love, but suddenly recoiled when he learned that his childhood friend wanted to meet. He was shocked and confused, but his gaze returned to his wife, noticing her trembling and confusion. But at the same time, he felt her scent and he couldn't tear himself away. He sighed heavily and said regretfully that he was very sorry, adding that his wife should rest. Jalora looked at him with bewilderment, not understanding why he was apologizing and wondering if he really didn't like being with her. She sighed heavily, realizing that deep down he still loved his childhood friend. After some time, he met his friend and gave her a menacing look, because it was already late at night and he wanted to know why she came. Evelyn looked at her friend sadly, wondering if she needed any reason to visit. She noted with a gentle smile that he looked a little confused. She asked if he really had so much to do that he didn't even have time for a cup of tea with her. Then she asked if he simply wanted to see the Empress instead of her. The Emperor looked menacingly at his companion and declared that now was not the time for jokes, and that she should immediately get to the point. Evelyn sighed heavily and noted that it was just a simple joke, and he could have been a little kinder. She sighed and asked if he remembered what would happen in a month. Adil was taken aback for a moment and froze. She sighed again and stated that the anniversary of Alaric's death was coming up soon. Evelyn noted with sadness in her voice that she had seen him last night, and he had been very kind as always. With tears in her eyes, she admitted that she felt as if he had been there the whole time. She looked at the Emperor intently and asked if he had forgotten his promise to Alaric. She looked at the Emperor again and declared that he should take care of her for him. The Emperor could not stand it and shouted angrily that he had not forgotten, so she should stop reminding him of such things. Evelyn couldn't resist and rushed towards him, sighing and adding that she hadn't mentioned Alaric on purpose. She looked at her friend with anxiety and tears in her eyes and stated that 3 years had already passed, asking with a trembling voice if he still felt guilty for his death. She screamed in her heart that it wasn't only his fault, desperately trying to ease the weight of the moment. The young lady was taken aback and gasped in fear when she saw his anger and tremblingly asked for forgiveness, admitting that she should not have raised such a painful topic. Evelyn looked away, her lips pressed together and trembling, explaining that she only wanted to talk about the anniversary of the death, afraid of offending him again. With a heavy heart, she bowed deeply and bitterly declared that she would leave and would no longer return to this memory. As she left, she looked at the Emperor with a sly grin, realizing that mentioning the young man was the best way to give him a headache. The Emperor was in shock, suffering from an unbearable headache, as if the whole world had taken pity on him. He remembered again the day of his brother's death, and a chill of horror ran down his spine. The gazes of everyone present, directed at him, pressing mercilessly, came to mind. He felt empty and in a burning pain, but at the same time he was drawn to the scent of his wife, as if it could comfort him. After some time, Adil quietly approached his wife and saw how she was sleeping peacefully, as if the whole world had disappeared around her. He was beside himself with emotion, as if every breath she took seemed precious to him, but he couldn't change anything. He saw her sleeping quietly, unsuspecting. He stared at her for a moment. Adil reached out to his wife in confusion, his heart beating unevenly, overflowing with feelings. Suddenly, he smelled her scent, which instantly knocked him off his feet and made him freeze with excitement. He hugged his wife tightly, immersing himself in the sweet scent of her skin and gradually coming to his senses. The next morning, the young empress woke up with a heaviness on her chest. Breathing was difficult, and her heart sank. Jalora was taken aback and stared in surprise at her husband sleeping next to her, her heart skipping a beat in surprise. She didn't understand why he ended up in the same bed, but the feeling of fear was replaced by the soft warmth of sleep. Jalora shyly caught the heat of his breath, feeling the blood pounding in her temples from the closeness. She saw his beautiful sleeping face. The lady looked at her husband as if enchanted, realizing that it was a dream. Suddenly, the emperor embraced her and pulled her towards him, and her lips involuntarily touched his. Shock overwhelmed her. The dream seemed too real, and she pushed it away, trying to return to reality. In a moment, she realized that it was just a dream, and she could allow herself to act freely. A few seconds later, the emperor woke up. His eyes met, and the world around him was filled with a quiet, trembling reality. He was confused and did not understand what was happening, why he ended up in his wife's room. His heart was pounding from surprise. Jalora sighed, realizing that he was just in her dream, excitement filling her. She knew she had to talk to him, She couldn't resist, and with a trembling voice, asked if he was going to go somewhere again, catching him off guard. Pulling closer, she demanded an honest answer, shyly asking if he didn't want to be near her. Adil froze for a moment, shocked by her boldness and unexpected question, his eyes widening in surprise. Laura knew she had to take the initiative and looked at him shyly, her heart beating faster. Then the young lady gave in to her emotions and kissed her husband with trepidation and tenderness, her heart beating strongly. Adil froze, shock overwhelmed him, embarrassment mixed with surprise. He did not understand why she acted so brazenly. He remembered how she had been scared the previous night and how she had shown a completely different determination during the day. The emperor looked at his wife with bewilderment, trying to understand what thoughts were hidden behind her bold actions. The young lady pounced on him with a bold passion and threw him into the bed, stunning him with surprise. Adil was taken aback by her strong scent and turned away, unable to look at her perfect form. But the empress was not going to give in. She gently turned his head and asked with trepidation why he was turning away. Jalora asked shyly and timidly if he really didn't love her at all. This question took him by surprise, and the emperor involuntarily became embarrassed from head to toe. Then she stated that it was not at all necessary to answer, since this was not the main question now. She knew it was just a dream, and she could completely allow herself to act according to her own will. The young lady was a little puzzled, didn't know how to kiss, was out of breath, and the emperor looked on in surprise and wondered if she was trying to strangle him. He pulled back and gently asked her to take a breath. Adil looked at his wife with a gentle smile and said that next time she should not forget to breathe. Without giving her a break, he kissed her again passionately and tenderly. Jalora hoped that this dream would never end, because being next to her husband was incredibly pleasant. Adil passionately kissed every inch of his wife's skin, lured by her strong, alluring scent. An unsuspecting maid entered the room and announced with a smile that the morning preparations had begun. But when she saw the picture in front of her, she froze in a daze. The newlyweds looked at the maid in bewilderment, puffing with passion. Marie bowed her head and apologized deeply, allowing them to continue. She quickly slammed the door and left, leaving the empress perplexed. Jalora was stunned, not understanding how the maid ended up in her dream. She soon realized that this was not a dream at all, and looked at the emperor with a puzzled expression, trying to understand what she had done. The emperor became embarrassed and called his wife, but she asked for forgiveness in horror. Adil was taken aback, not expecting such a thing, but she explained that she thought it was a dream and did something disrespectful. The young man said with bewilderment that they were married and that there was nothing strange about it. She trembled, afraid that he did not love her, thinking that she had imposed her feelings on him. Adil asked sternly why she thought so, but she was embarrassed and could not answer. He was puzzled. When she was half asleep, she was brave and sweet, but now she was trembling like an autumn leaf. A few days later, a small reception was held, and the young ladies discussed the empress with interest, whispering about her character and actions. They whispered about her incredible passion and audacity in the bedroom, realizing that the stranger was forced to become like this in order to survive. A moment later, they noticed the emperor's assistant and ran towards him as fast as they could. Beaming with smiles and introducing themselves, Cesis greeted the ladies with a polite smile and asked if they had any business. They said that they would like to know what the relationship was between the empress and the emperor. After all, they heard that the newlyweds went for walks and also shared a room every night. He was shocked by this and did not want to answer, so he left them with lightning speed. But the ladies only affirmed that if high-ranking people were on good terms, it gave them peace of mind. At that very moment, the young man, smiling, asked for silence and declared that he would tell them everything. He began to talk in detail about the couple, and everyone listened to him with sincere attention. After some time, the young man brought information to his mistress about the lady. The queen was shocked and surprised, as she did not expect the young lady to live so long. She assumed that the tyrant was completely captivated by her. The young man said with a grin that the news of their physical relationship had spread throughout the empire, so this was the perfect chance to use her charm and take revenge on the tyrant. After some time, the maid watched her mistress with anxiety and concern, fearing that she did not like the food. Laura sighed heavily, feeling empty inside, and sadly reported that she simply had no appetite. At that very moment, Marie screamed. Joy blossomed on her face, but a slight worry flashed in her eyes. In a hurry, she announced that she would immediately call Lord Cecil for an inspection, but the Empress managed to stop the maid. Confused, Jalora explained that nothing had actually happened to the Emperor, and that was why he had no appetite. The maid was dumbfounded, because just recently, they seemed completely absorbed in each other, and the Empress only embarrassedly repeated that nothing had happened. Maria was amazed and surprised, because the Empress followed the instructions in the manual, but it did not seem to work. Laura noted with embarrassment that the Emperor had shown kindness to her, but due to the weak mutual understanding, she was a little confused. The maid took a deep breath and admitted that she now understood everything completely. At that very moment, she handed the Empress a book and pointed out several key points to help her get closer to the Emperor. With a smile, she explained that this was the most effective way to create a romantic memory meant only for the two of them. Marie stated that it would be wonderful if they went on a date, and her eyes sparkled with excitement as she excitedly told the Empress everything. After some time, the young maid, with a slight tremor in her hands, gathered her mistress for a small reception, smiling warmly and filling the room with a light bustle. At the same time, she praised her mistress, and the Empress blushed shyly, barely holding back a smile, because it was the first time she wore such exquisite clothes, and her heart fluttered. Maria approached the lady, her eyes sparkling with cunning, and said that the gentleman was a little constrained, but now she herself must wake him up and whisper something important to him. Meanwhile, the Emperor, standing in front of the stables, waited patiently and with slight excitement for his wife. Feeling the anticipation growing within him, the Empress ran up to the Emperor with a joyful and radiant smile, her heart pounding with delight, and she nodded to him welcomingly. Adil was taken aback for a moment, having never seen her in such a magnificent appearance before. But she sighed shyly and apologized for keeping him waiting, her heart pounding with excitement in her chest. But the Emperor's embarrassment was so great that he only managed to declare that he had not waited long, and Jalora, with a beaming smile, noted that it would be a great honor for her if he taught her the art of horsemanship. Her heart trembling with anticipation, Adil looked away, confusion playing on his face, and he admitted with a soft smile that he had heard that horse shows were also held in her kingdom. But now his thoughts were only about her. He smiled, his eyes sparkling, and noted that she must have seen something like this many times, and the young Empress, embarrassed and taken aback, did not know what to answer, her heart pulsating with excitement. Even the Emperor said that it was boring to watch, and that she should experience the joy of horse riding herself, his gaze full of tender anticipation. He extended his hand to her, which was supportive and warm, and declared that he would be there so that she could confidently saddle the horse, her heart trembling with excitement. Adil looked at his wife in bewilderment, not hiding his slight surprise, and she timidly admitted that she didn't know how to ride a horse, feeling her face burning with embarrassment. He was shocked because he knew that she was a princess and that she should have such a skill, but a tender concern awoke inside him. Jlora sheepishly admitted that she couldn't cope alone and therefore asked him for help, her gaze full of hope and tenderness. She smiled at her husband, her heart leaping, and asked if they could both ride on the same horse. A feeling of excitement overwhelmed her completely. At that moment, the Emperor agreed, with a slight smile on his face, because he had no choice, and the young lady was filled with joy and trepidation. But soon his face changed. Seriousness entered his gaze, and he said that she should study well, his voice trembling with excitement and concern. Laura asked in surprise if this meant he would teach her to ride, her heart beating faster and faster. Adil asked, puzzled, if she didn't like this idea, and she, embarrassed to the roots of her hair, said that it was not that simple and did not want to worry him. But soon the Emperor gently assured her that everything was fine and began teaching her, explaining all the nuances with care and patience, and her heart sang with delight. He said that once she got on the horse, she needed to hold the reins tightly and maintain an upright posture, his voice sounding confident and inspiring. Jalora looked at her husband with embarrassment, seeing how carefully he was teaching her, and her heart fluttered with admiration. A moment later, she noticed how he deftly spurred his horse. They rushed into the distance, the wind playing with her hair, and her breathing quickened. For some time, Jalora watched her husband closely. Because he seemed to her the ideal of beauty and grace, her heart was filled with delight. She was suddenly taken aback as he rushed closer and said that she should give him her hand, A feeling of fear and anticipation mixed in her chest. The young lady was at a loss, not expecting this, but her husband reassured her that everything would be fine, and her heart sank again with excitement. Trembling with fear, she extended her hand to him, feeling a tremor in every finger and a slight tremor in her whole body. After some time, the young people arrived at the place, and they were surrounded by bright wildflowers, filling the air with a sweet aroma. Jalora was scared, but she felt that they had already stopped. Although she did not dare open her eyes, her heart was squeezed with excitement. A moment later, the emperor whispered softly in her ear. Asking her to open her eyes, she complied, and for a moment her breath stopped from the beauty around her. Laura exclaimed with a beaming smile that she had never seen such beauty, her eyes sparkling with happiness. Then she looked away at her husband in embarrassment and asked if he thought the same as she did, her heart beating unevenly. The emperor froze for a moment, remembering his friend, who had been gone for a long time, because she, too, was bathing in wildflowers with a radiant smile. Adil asked his wife for forgiveness for his confusion, because she was so beautiful that he was speechless, his heart fluttering with admiration. The young lady was incredibly embarrassed by his words. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing was ragged. But soon she became even more embarrassed, for the emperor kissed her tenderly, and her heart soared in her chest. She was dumbfounded and looked at her husband in bewilderment, not expecting anything like this, and her every breath trembled with delight and excitement. After a while, the maid, with a slight smile, asked her mistress how her horse ride had gone, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Jalora sheepishly admitted that the emperor had taken her to a truly magnificent flower field, her heart still fluttering with the delight she had experienced. Marie watched the lady with shining eyes, eager to find out all the details. The empress reported with slight embarrassment that the emperor kissed her on the forehead, barely holding back the trembling in his hands. She remembered that awkward but touching moment of intimacy and froze for a moment, feeling her whole body fill with tender warmth. Adil, with a contented and gentle smile, declared that she did not need to be embarrassed, because this was a reward for her courage, and his gaze was full of tender care. The empress was extremely surprised, because something like this had never happened to her before, and a light joy, mixed with excitement, blossomed in her soul. Marie remarked with a gentle smile that the emperor seemed to be much more of a romantic than one might expect, and there was genuine admiration in her voice. She added that it was the emperor who personally planted that flower field and did not show it to anyone for many years, as if he kept it as a precious secret. The empress, with childishly sincere surprise, asked if he had never shown this place to his childhood friend. The maid looked at her mistress with puzzlement and cautiously asked why she suddenly started talking about Lady Evelyn. Jalora looked away timidly and quietly admitted that she was simply thinking about it, not attaching much importance to her words. Marie sighed and said that the lady had thrown into hysterics more than once, begging the emperor to take her there, but he had never given in to her whims. She added thoughtfully that it seemed that the flower field was something truly important and dear to the emperor's heart. With a slight smile, the maid told her mistress that since the emperor had voluntarily shown this place to her, it meant that she had become a truly special person to him. Jalora paused for a moment, quietly considering her maid's words. A brief glance from my husband, lasting only a few seconds, came to mind, but in which she managed to notice a deep, almost painful sadness. Suddenly, Marie joyfully grabbed her mistress's hands and excitedly declared that she had followed their plan exactly, and everything had ended well. Beaming with joy, the maid confidently said that the empress would very soon win the heart of her stern husband. Jalora, with a quiet smile, said that she had made a promise to the emperor, and he, in return, promised to teach her fencing and horse riding. Marie stood stunned, unable to believe her ears, as the idea that the empress would be trained in martial arts by the greatest emperor himself seemed incredible. Jalora admitted with a slight smile that she had heard of his outstanding fencing skills and therefore wanted to see it with her own eyes. At that moment, the maid was speechless, not knowing whether to tell her mistress the truth. With a heavy sigh, she quietly told the young lady that if things got too tough for her, she didn't have to hold back her tears. She then added that the lady should not be overzealous in such training. Muttering under her breath, the maid hurried out, thinking that she should go to the doctor beforehand to get some ointments for her wounds. After some time, the young lady finally went to fencing training, but almost immediately began to receive strong and merciless blows from her opponent. After just a few minutes of fighting, the lady realized with bitter realization what exactly her maid had meant. The emperor did not show the slightest leniency towards his wife, even in training combat, easily defeating her each time and calmly informing her that she was already dead. A moment later, the empress froze in shock as the emperor's wooden blade stopped right before her eyes. To her regret, she could neither move nor utter a word, as if all her will had disappeared. Adil, looking at his wife, calmly noted that she had tried hard and was already ready for the next training sessions. At that moment, the young lady's eyes flashed with hope, and she excitedly asked if he was really serious about what he said. The emperor extended his hand and helped her up, saying that this was only the very beginning of their long training. Adil smiled slightly and congratulated her on taking her first step. However, deep down, the young lady knew that if he ever found out the whole truth about her, he would certainly be disappointed. At that moment, painful memories from the past came flooding back to her, when her mentor had furiously beaten her for her inability to remember even simple rules of etiquette. Madame then shouted that sooner or later everyone would understand that she was just a pathetic substitute for a real bride. The teacher grabbed the girl by the collar of her clothes with fury and looked at her with icy contempt. Unable to bear it any longer, she roughly pushed her away, and the young lady fell with a crash onto the cold floor. The madam became furious, deciding that the girl was deliberately embarrassing her in front of the queen. Jalora trembled with fear and, in a trembling voice, asked her mentor to set an example again, assuring her that she would try her best. Holding back tears and shaking all over, she again promised that she would do everything right. But in response to her pleas, she received only a cruel and painful blow with a whip. Jalora clearly remembered the years of humiliation and harsh training in a foreign kingdom, but now she understood that her husband was a stern but fair mentor. He often offered her a helping hand with a quiet smile, and never resorted to the help of matchmakers, who usually broke the characters of young ladies. That's why she was afraid of letting him down and carefully asked him to help her with additional preparation. She stated that only by facing fear and overcoming it can a person dodge even a fatal blow. Jalora looked closely at her husband and admitted that she wanted to try to avoid his sword. Adil noticed her resilience and calmly said that he would stay with her until the end of the training, and these words filled her with quiet joy. After some time, the maid diligently treated her mistress's wounds and looked with alarm at her hands, covered in bruises. Jalora admitted with a stubborn smile that despite the pain, she felt real joy while fencing. Marie looked at her mistress with a smile, remembering the words of a familiar knight about her duels with the emperor. She said that the knight had heard the emperor say many times during training that the empress had died. Jalora confirmed with a slight smile that this was exactly how it happened. But, looking away in embarrassment, she admitted that the emperor had also told her that she had perseverance. Meanwhile, the emperor was relaxing in the bathhouse and thoughtfully reflecting on the events of the last few days. Cesis visited the emperor and asked if he was being too strict with the empress, as there were many wounds on her body. Adil looked calmly at his friend and said that he shouldn't worry too much. He asked not to underestimate the empress, because recently he had realized something important about her. The emperor admitted that his wife had amazing tenacity and a strong character, hidden behind her fragile appearance. He also noticed that she couldn't stand defeat at all. He sighed heavily and admitted that he sometimes felt a strange aura of Cecilia's house from her. Cesis was surprised by these words, because it was the emperor who had once raised this house. It was then that he decided that he should help the emperor and empress become closer to each other. Meanwhile, the young lady was slowly making her way to the large bathhouse that the doctor had recently told her about. A moment later, a magnificent bathhouse appeared before her in all its luxury. The empress slowly undressed and carefully stepped into the warm font. But suddenly, someone's hand grabbed her. Coming to her senses, she froze, seeing the emperor, who looked at her with unexpected tenderness and hugged her tightly. Jalora was taken aback and quickly apologized because she did not expect the emperor to be in the bathroom. At that very moment, she guiltily declared that she would leave immediately. But Adil quickly grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him, declaring that since she had come to this place, she should keep him company. Jalora was extremely embarrassed because he was standing next to her naked. At the same time, she timidly touched his body, and the emperor noted with a sly smile that she was clearly interested in his figure. Then the young lady pulled back and apologized again. Adil smiled and said that she didn't have to hold back, and that she could touch his chest as a reward for her hard day's training. Jalora was shocked and didn't understand what was happening, wondering if this was an illusion due to reading too much about the love manual. The lady looked at the emperor tenderly, noticing how drops of water rolled down his face. Laura looked at her husband with excitement, realizing that he was simply a work of art. At that moment, the emperor reached out to her and noticed the wound on her shoulder, asking if she had received it during training. Jalora, turning away her gaze, assured him that the wound would heal quickly and that he should not worry. Adil gently touched his wife, kissing her shoulder. The young lady flinched in surprise, but the emperor was not going to stop and immediately began kissing her neck. She was embarrassed by his every touch, but at the same time she felt aroused. Her body was warming up. Her heart was beating wildly. The lady sighed heavily and asked her husband to take a break. Adil shyly pulled back and asked why she was asking him to stop. At that very moment, the empress admitted that her body was behaving strangely. Breathing heavily, she said she felt dizzy. She feels unsteady, causing the emperor to freeze for a moment. But then he burst into wild laughter, and Jalora was puzzled, not understanding why he was laughing. Adil looked closely at his wife, noting her diligence in training, and wanted to express his sincere gratitude to her. But soon, with a predatory grin, he changed his mind and his gaze became full of playful insolence. At that very moment, the emperor pulled her towards him and hugged her with such tenderness that Jalora's heart began to beat faster. Without wasting a moment, he kissed her with soft passion, as if giving warmth and care at the same time. The newlyweds gave in to passion, their lips met, and their hands strove to be closer to each other. Although her body ached with fatigue, she wanted him. Jalora felt an unusual excitement and enjoyed every moment with him. Jalora longed to be closer to the emperor, and his tender lips ignited a heat throughout her body. But suddenly he pulled back, noticing that her thoughts were somewhere far away, and not with him, and this made him wary. Adil sighed heavily, realizing that he had gone too far, but he still hugged his wife with care and tenderness. After some time, the emperor tenderly laid his wife in bed, lovingly adjusting the blanket. He was taken aback when he noticed the small book hidden under the pillow, and his gaze became wary. Adil became interested in the book and flipped through the pages. He wondered if she had learned how to handle him using this manual. Adil laughed as he looked at his sleeping wife, and his heart filled with warmth from her sweet innocence. Overcome by emotion, he moved closer and tenderly kissed her lips. A moment later, he noticed a beautiful, radiant smile on her sleepy face, which warmed his soul. Some time later, the young empress met with the emperor's assistant, her heart pounding, and she was alarmed. Laura was embarrassed to learn that she would have to prepare for a lavish party to celebrate the founding anniversary. Ceases, with a sincere smile, stated that there was no one more suitable for the role and that she would receive full support. The empress was shocked, not believing that she was trusted so unconditionally. She doubted herself, feeling the burden of the empress's duties and responsibility to her subjects. Laura, with a timid smile, promised to do her best and justify the trust. Ceases noted with a slight chuckle that the emperor had said she couldn't lose, and that seemed to be true. The lady felt a mixture of surprise and embarrassment, not expecting such words about herself. Ceases announced that a lavish ball would be held at the celebration, and preparations should begin immediately. She was puzzled and slightly confused by the sudden news. He smiled, adding that the guests would be looking forward to the dance of the emperor and empress. The young man left the room, anxiously wondering if he was trusting the empress too much. He felt a little nervous, but was glad that her presence eased the emperor's headaches. The young man doubted her complete sincerity and wanted to make sure that she was not hiding anything. Ceases watched nervously, wondering why the Queen of the Blue Kingdom was so cautious and secretive. He saw her secretly passing letters to her daughter, and this made him uneasy. Ceases understood that the Empress's true face would only be revealed at the celebration, and this kept him on edge. He also knew that he had to discuss everything with the Emperor in order to properly resolve the issues regarding the Queen's letters. The Emperor looked at his wife in surprise, his eyes shining with surprise, and asked what she was talking about. Jalora looked at him with a timid but warm smile and asked him to train with her every day. Earlier, the maid told the Empress, with a joyful smile, that she would work hard to learn all the steps as quickly as possible. At this, the Empress was a little puzzled. After all, this was new to her, and she was worried that she wouldn't be able to cope with her responsibilities. To her regret, she didn't know how to dance at all and didn't know what to do about it, because her reputation and position depended on dancing. The emperor sighed heavily, amazed that such a graceful princess of nations could not even perform basic movements. Adil, looking at his wife, wondered if she was trying to seduce him again in such an unusual way. After a moment, he sighed and declared that they would train every day in the back garden of the empress's palace. At that very moment, he noticed his wife's radiant smile as she thanked him with shining eyes for his patience and attention. Some time later, the newlyweds were practicing their moves and dancing a waltz in the back garden of the empress's palace with joyful smiles. Looking at his clumsy wife, he consoled her and gently gave her instructions, and the empress immediately apologized for her mistakes because she did not want to let him down. Adil smiled and asked his wife to ignore the mistakes, adding that she could try again without fear. She meekly agreed, and they danced around for a while. Each attempt was accompanied by small but cute mistakes. After some time, the emperor finally became convinced that his wife did not know how to dance at all. Laura sighed heavily and timidly asked her husband to dance with her childhood friend at the ball. He looked at her carefully and asked with slight surprise why he had to dance with Evelyn. Adil looked angrily at his wife and asked if she was really going to mention her friend at every opportunity. She remained silent, not knowing what to answer him. The emperor gently stated that she should not humiliate herself, since he himself had once made many mistakes. He remembered his first dance lessons and how he screamed and scolded himself for every mistake. Adil could hardly hold back his tears, thinking that his older brother had learned the dance in just one day, and he still couldn't master the moves. The young man looked at his brother with a gentle smile, stroking his head. Then he promised to stay by his side until he did it perfectly. Adil, looking at his wife, said that she shouldn't apologize so much. After all, he promised to teach her to dance and had no intention of going back on his word. The empress smiled shyly, but her heart was filled with joy. A moment later, she admitted that his instructions had been too strict and that she simply needed to step on his toes to feel compatibility. Adil gently told her not to dwell on the details, as mistakes were part of the process. Gilora obeyed her husband, and they began to dance with a smile, twirling to the beat, enjoying every moment. After the dance ended, the young empress thanked her husband with sincere joy for his patience and guidance. The emperor noted with a smile that their dance together was excellent. Gilora, embarrassed by her emotions, hugged him and thanked him sincerely. He became embarrassed and, looking away, stated that this was the result of her hard work. Gilora looked closely at her husband and asked if there would be a reward now, causing him to look unexpectedly confused. The emperor looked at her in surprise, not expecting such a thing. She sheepishly explained that she only asked because he had already rewarded her for her horsemanship and swordsmanship. Adil gently pulled her towards him and smiled, declaring that now she could choose the reward herself. He continued tenderly, adding that he would like her to do something for him, leaving her free to decide what exactly. Gilora looked away in embarrassment, but asked with interest whether he would be angry with her despite her plans. Adil said with a gentle smile that she didn't seem hot-tempered to him at all, and this made her slightly embarrassed. The young lady froze for a moment, her heart pounding wildly and her cheeks burning brightly. But a moment later, courage took over, and with fire in her eyes, she sternly ordered the emperor to sit down, her voice trembling. He was taken aback, stunned by her pressure, not expecting such audacity and passion at the same time. Gilora looked menacingly at her husband and declared that he must immediately sit down as she ordered him. Her eyes sparkled with determination. Adil asked if she really meant for him to sit directly on the ground, slightly amazed by her courage. Then the empress used brute force on him and said that while he was standing, he was too tall and it was inconvenient for her to do certain things to him. He was truly shocked by her actions, since she had never done anything like this before. Laura looked at her husband with a smile and said that he might be in a little pain, but he had to endure it. Her eyes sparkled with cunning, and the emperor, frozen in a daze, wondered what she intended to do. A moment later, the young empress began the massage, but the emperor was taken aback and could not hide his slight surprise. Gilora looked at the emperor with a gentle smile and asked if he was okay, her eyes shining with concern and timid curiosity. She thanked him for his patience throughout all her practical sessions, because it hurt her that she could not repay him with a simple massage. The emperor was surprised by such a confession, and immediately declared that it was he who should thank her, his voice trembling with sincerity. She looked down in embarrassment, not understanding why he was saying such a thing. At the same time, he understood that her scent was the only medicine that soothed his headaches. Cesus presented the letter to the emperor and, with a slight smile, asked if he would like to see its contents, nervously awaiting his reaction. Adil looked at his subordinate intently, his gaze intense, and asked if he had ever heard the legend of Pandora's box. The emperor understood that as soon as he opened the letter, everything that had happened between him and the empress could lose its meaning, and his heart sank with anxiety. Looking at his subordinate, he sighed heavily and stated with cold determination that the only reason for approving the marriage with the empress was to keep the neighboring kingdom under control. He understood that his wife was not particularly to blame, and his heart was full of quiet concern for her. At the same time, he wanted to see what choice she would make for herself, observing her sincere decisions. He was eager to understand her true reactions, suspecting that it would be much more interesting than simple observation. He also realized that he desperately needed her scent, which surprised Cesus. Cesus, looking at the gentleman, wondered whether it was really not the case that the emperor had fallen in love with his wife, but only a matter of cold calculation. The emperor simply wanted to keep his wife in a cage and observe her actions. At that very moment, he bowed to the emperor and declared that he understood everything, promising to deliver the letter to his wife safe and sound. Some time later, the young man visited the gloomy dungeon and came to the servant, who, bursting into bitter tears, begged him to give her at least a little money so that she could deliver the letter to the empress. Cesus looked intently at the maid and sternly declared that she must do everything exactly as she was ordered. The maid was taken aback, not believing her ears and not expecting such an order. He handed her the letter and sternly told her that she must give it to the empress, but act carefully so as not to arouse suspicion. Meanwhile, the lady continued to practice dancing. Marie looked closely at the lady and gently recommended taking a short break. She smiled and promised to bring something sweet to please the empress. Jalora, with a gentle smile, asked her maid to serve her an exquisite dessert. A moment later, she was alone with her thoughts, taking a break from the grueling training. Jalora recalled with a warm smile how she and her husband had perfected the beautiful waltz. But these memories soon disappeared when the maid again attracted her attention. The maid bowed low and handed over the letter. The empress was slightly taken aback, as she had never seen anything like it. But soon Jalora was taken aback when she realized who the letter was from, and she felt fear. It was the queen. The queen wrote to her sweet and precious daughter, sharing the latest news and noting that her daughter had lived up to all her expectations. She understood that the young lady's life was not easy, but asked her to be patient a little longer for the sake of the kingdom. The queen also reported that her cruel husband was trying to seize territory from their kingdom and asked her daughter to stop him. The young lady was puzzled, realizing that the emperor intended to reclaim the lands that originally belonged to the empire. She sighed heavily, for such news troubled her heart. But the empress understood that, despite her husband's actions, she could not stop him. She was confused and did not know what to do, as she was in the middle of the fire. She was sad because she knew that her husband was actually a good person. At the same time, she did not know how to act and what to do in such a situation. After all, she understood that their marriage was supposed to bring peace. A moment later, she wrote a reply. Jalora looked at him hopefully, wanting the queen to be pleased with her words. That same evening, the maid slowly approached the small table and noticed her mistress's letters. She read the letter and was taken aback for a moment, not expecting that the empress could show such determination. She knew that her mistress was a timid and gentle person, but she wrote such a frank letter. Marie, looking at her mistress, anxiously asked if she had not met with the emperor for several days because he was busy. Jalora replied with a slight smile that they had so many things to talk about that there was no time at all. Then Marie looked intently at the lady, her eyes shining, and asked if everything that was happening was really true. She held out the letter she found on the bedside table, as if revealing a precious secret. The empress was amazed and asked the maid in confusion where she had found such a personal letter. Marie, with tears in her eyes, explained that this was a secret love letter, and at the same time emphasized the purity of the empress's feelings. She admitted that she read the letter with trepidation, as it reminded her of reading a captivating romance novel. Jalora was extremely embarrassed and exclaimed that this letter was not a love letter at all. Her heart was beating faster. She took a deep breath and said that she simply remembered the moments she spent with the emperor, and that was why she wrote something like that. She was overcome with embarrassment as she confessed that she had unintentionally written a long letter, and the maid could hardly contain her smile. Looking at her mistress with warmth, Marie asked why she didn't try to sincerely confess her feelings to the emperor. Jalora looked at the maid in bewilderment. After all, the thought of conveying her own feelings never even occurred to her. She suddenly remembered her childhood, and her heart sank with nostalgia. Jalora recalled her first meeting with her peers, full of shyness and anticipation. After all, when she approached them, the young lady asked to play, hoping for friendship and attention. But the children only looked at her sullenly and immediately immersed themselves in their own affairs. They left her alone because they did not want to communicate with a person like her. She remembered telling her teacher she didn't like the salad, and her heart sank. The teacher became furious and shouted that she must eat everything immediately, without leaving a crumb. She realized that no one would listen to her thoughts. So she decided to refuse the offer because the emperor was too busy. Marie took her mistress by the hand and warmly declared that her stories were not at all boring, and the emperor would certainly be pleased. The young empress thought for a moment, pondering every word and advice she had heard from the maid. A moment later, she said decisively that she would try to speak to the emperor herself and express her feelings. Marie looked closely at the lady and noted with a smile that, according to the instructions, it was better to read the letter out loud. Jalora asked with surprise whether she would really have to voice the contents of the letter to the emperor. The maid, smiling, confirmed that this was indeed the case, while feeling a slight awkwardness and anxiety for her mistress. The empress was confused, and at the same time she did not know whether this was a good idea. Marie said with a satisfied smile that they could find a practice partner to prepare for the big moment. After some time, the young man pondered the problem, lost in his thoughts, because the empress's move was swift. But after hearing this, he was taken aback, not expecting such courage and determination from the young empress. Jalora sheepishly admitted that she was fully aware of the seriousness and difficulty of her task before the emperor. Marie noticed that the empress was worried about a possible mistake in front of her husband, so she asked to listen to her and give advice. He sighed heavily and admitted that it was a surprise, but he wanted to understand why he had been chosen as a practice partner. Jalora replied with a slight smile that the Lord understood the emperor perfectly and was a man who could be trusted. The young man was taken aback for a moment and froze, not expecting to hear such confidential words from the empress. At that moment, he looked away in shock and declared in surprise that Jalora was too kind. The empress smiled and said gently that if he did not want to do it, she would not force him. Cesis, without looking up, confidently declared that he would carry out everything as decided, without the slightest doubt. At that moment, he tenderly took Jalori's hand in his and said that she could consider him her emperor. Cesis suspected that the princess of the neighboring kingdom might make a mistake, but I saw her sincere words and eyes full of determination. He looked intently into her eyes and saw their only devotion to the emperor, without the slightest doubt about her intentions. Cesis was slightly confused and did not understand the strange pounding in his chest that he suddenly felt next to her. After a moment, he stepped back and declared with admiration that her words were wonderful and had certainly touched the emperor's heart. The young lady beamed with joy as she heard such praise, and her cheeks flushed slightly. The maid happily supported her mistress, proudly watching her emotions and smile. The young man looked at them intently, realizing that he was wrong about her. After some time, Cesis appeared at an audience with the emperor and reported that the letter had been successfully delivered. He also reported that he was at the empress's palace to check on what was happening and ensure safety. Remembering the empress's glowing eyes, Cesis realized that she wanted to give her husband a real surprise. With a heavy sigh, he reported that the empress had carefully prepared the surprise and had not shown anything suspicious. The emperor looked at his subordinate in surprise, not expecting to hear about his wife's preparation and diligence. Cesis confirmed everything and added that the empress had prepared very diligently, after which the emperor immediately decided to go to her. After some time, the emperor came to his wife, but when he opened the door, he unexpectedly ran into a servant. Marie looked at the gentleman with a slight smile and timidly apologized for the sudden obstacle. Adil looked closely at the maid, his eyes sparkling with curiosity and slight anxiety. He quietly asked where the Empress was. The maid, with a trembling voice and a nervous smile, admitted that her mistress was in the garden, absorbing the moonlight into her shining eyes. The Emperor walked slowly towards her. He froze, barely noticing her, enveloped in a soft silvery glow. Her beauty suddenly robbed him of his usual confidence. Adil took a step forward, his heart beating faster, as if seeing her for the first time in all her grace and tenderness. The young man watched the moonlight play on her face and carefully asked if this whole evening had been her secret surprise. Reminded that his subordinate had told him about the surprise, he smiled slightly, but inside his soul was singing with excitement. Laura, blushing slightly, smiled timidly and said that this was only a small part of her little secret. She raised her eyes to him and, with trepidation in her voice, admitted that there was something else she wanted to say in person, without witnesses. The lady carefully asked if he had a few free minutes to hear her revelation. Adil sighed heavily, feeling his heart stop, and nodded, ready to listen to her every word. Jalora, holding her breath, began her confession, gathering courage from the depths of her soul, her voice trembling slightly. She knew that several months had passed since their wedding, and every minute of waiting felt like an eternity. Before this, she considered him a cold tyrant, menacing and unapproachable, capable of crushing any heart. At the same time, she saw contemptuous looks and heard whispers. The desire for him to love her seemed bold, almost reckless, but her heart demanded a confession. The first time she met him, she was afraid that he would simply reject her without giving her a single chance. With a slight, timid smile, she admitted that she wanted to live with him one more day, full of joy and warmth. Adil listened attentively. Her every word pierced him to the depths of his soul. His heart beat in time with her breathing. Jalora sheepishly revealed that she had done something brave on their wedding night, and now she could no longer hide her feelings. Timidly, almost in a whisper, the lady said that she was afraid that he would hurt her, but inside, she was sure of his care. Looking at him, she understood that he was doing everything possible for her. Her fears were in vain. She stated with complete confidence that the rumors about his cruelty were false and had nothing to do with him. Jalora called his name. Her voice was soft and gentle. She said that he was a kind and considerate person. Casting aside all doubts, she boldly admitted that she loved him with all her heart, without reserve. Adil was taken aback. His gaze widened. He did not expect such a revelation. His heart sank. Laura added, with a slight smile, that she would like to know more about him and become a real wife. He looked away, embarrassed, his thoughts racing to the letter from the Queen, which was still lying in his hands. Adil was confused and perplexed. Not understanding where such frankness came from, he doubted whether he could trust her words completely. Jalora pulled him gently towards her, waiting for an answer, but he hesitated, not knowing what to say. Suddenly, he was overcome by a slight malaise, and the Empress rushed towards him, trembling with anxiety. He grabbed her hand and said that he wanted to understand something important, his heart pounding like crazy. Jalora looked at him in confusion, not understanding his sudden change in mood and intense gaze. He wondered if she was using her charm and scent to enchant him, as if playing with his heart. He wanted to understand whether she was telling the truth or manipulating his feelings and mind. Adil knew the contents of the Queen's letter very well, and this added to the internal tension. He squeezed her hand too hard, and she whispered through her teeth that it hurt. He immediately let go, sighing. Looking away, he smiled and quietly asked for forgiveness for his harshness, his heart softening. Adil approached his wife, grinning slightly, and quietly asked if she really said that she loved him. Jalora nodded, and he, with a slight smile, asked if she wanted to be his real wife. She sheepishly confirmed what she had said earlier. He thanked her and admitted that from their first meeting at the wedding, he had been captivated by her beauty and kindness. The Empress was shocked because she thought he hated her. Her heart beat faster. With a victorious smile, he pulled her towards him, without saying a word, feeling her melt in his arms. Adil kissed her passionately, despite everything, surrendering to emotions and a sense of responsibility for her happiness and safety. The young men nearby watched them, fascinated and slightly embarrassed by the intimacy of the moment. Cesis was momentarily taken aback, feeling a mixture of admiration and pity for the princess, whose trepidation was so obvious. Adil, slightly embarrassed, and with a tender smile, confessed to his wife that if it weren't for his official duties, he would kiss her endlessly. Jalora blushed, looked down slightly, and declared that he should get back to business, to which the emperor only laughed softly in response. Adil, slightly embarrassed and with a tender smile, confessed to his wife that if it weren't for his official duties, he would kiss her endlessly. Jalora blushed, looking down slightly, and declared that he should get back to business, to which the emperor only laughed softly in response. Jalora, with a slight smile, asked her husband if he wanted something sweet for the evening and what exactly he liked best. The emperor quietly whispered in her ear that he would be glad to receive anything she brought, and this made her feel slightly excited. She was shocked by his behavior and extremely embarrassed. Jalora looked at him in surprise, not expecting him to become so gentle and eloquent. Embarrassed by his attention, she pulled away and said she would get busy preparing for the evening. Overjoyed, the young lady ran out of the room in a hurry, jumping slightly with delight. But as soon as she disappeared from sight, the emperor's gaze darkened and became stern, like a shadow on his heart. Jalora hastily prepared an exquisite delicacy for the emperor and, excitedly, carefully carried it to him. She was already heading towards the office, but suddenly froze, hearing someone call her name. Turning around, she saw Lady Evelyn, who greeted her with a beaming, almost mocking smile. Evelyn gently remarked that their meeting was a remarkable coincidence and asked if the Empress was going to see the Emperor. Jalora, with a warm smile, admitted that she was bringing her husband dessert and hoped to please him. Evelyn chuckled contentedly and said that she had also brought a treat, a cake she had baked herself. She added that the Emperor had choked on a cookie as a child and hadn't liked it since then, which greatly surprised Jalora. The Empress was at a loss, having never heard of this before, and felt slightly embarrassed. Evelyn remarked carelessly that it would be easier for the Emperor to eat her cake than to risk his wife's cookies. With a smug smile, she declared that she knew him better than anyone, since they had grown up together. She also told the Empress that next time she could ask her for advice. Jalora smiled softly and asked if she could ask her one question. Evelyn condescendingly replied that the Empress could ask whatever she wanted. Jalora knew that she and the Emperor had many happy childhood memories. They were connected for a long time. She also realized that their friendship had continued into their youth, which meant that a special closeness could have developed between them. These thoughts made Jalora feel uneasy, because she was just beginning to get to know her husband. She looked closely at Evelyn, dreaming of one day becoming as close to the Emperor. But deep down, she knew that she was still a long way from being a confident duchess. At this moment, the Knight Elon bowed warmly to the ladies, surprised to meet them. He said that he would immediately report their arrival to the Emperor. Evelyn reminded the knight with a slight smile that she usually didn't need to announce her arrival. Elon awkwardly replied that he was still obliged to report to the Emperor. Jalora politely asked him to ignore her and let Evelyn go first. The knight sighed heavily and admitted that he had received orders not to let anyone in that evening except the Empress. Evelyn asked in shock if this meant that even she was forbidden to enter. Upon hearing the confirmation, she instantly flushed with indignation. With a cold smile, she remarked that the Emperor must be too busy today. Without saying another word, she turned abruptly and walked away. Jalora hastened to stop her, not wanting to offend her. With a sincere smile, she explained that Evelyn only wanted to give the Emperor her cake. The Duchess narrowed her eyes mockingly and asked if the Empress was boasting about her special right to enter. Jalora quickly replied that she had no such intention at all. She just thought that the cake would go to waste if the Emperor didn't try it. Evelyn gave her a cold, piercing look and declared that she would solve this problem herself. Rage boiled inside her because the pitiful look of the hostage hurt her pride more than any words. The Emperor looked closely at his wife and coldly noted that he had heard. She had come to him with Evelyn. She quietly confirmed that this was indeed the case. Then he asked in an icy voice if the girl had said something cruel to her, because he felt how her scent had become alarmingly weaker. Jalora quickly replied that nothing of the sort had happened, but the Emperor immediately asked why she then stubbornly avoided his gaze. He slowly approached while the Empress waited silently, and quietly asked if she really wanted to say that even one look at his face was not able to lift her spirits, because her sad appearance for some reason hurt his heart. The young Empress was shocked by what she heard. Her mind understood the meaning of the words, but her heart was bewildered, and she could not utter a response. The emperor smiled softly and said that this was precisely why he wanted to see her warm, sincere, and beautiful smile as often as possible. Adil added with a slight smile that he was dying of hunger and asked curiously what she had brought him today. The empress recalled their recent conversation with confusion. Jalora quietly apologized and admitted that she hadn't known about his dislike of cookies until she overheard it from his friend. Adil sighed heavily and calmly said that it was just an old story, and now he definitely wouldn't choke on an ordinary cookie. But a moment later he felt ill, and the young empress rushed around him excitedly, not knowing how to help. Upon learning that she had baked the cookies with her own hands, he stubbornly ate every last crumb. Jalora looked at her husband with a warm and tender smile, realizing how stubborn and determined he was. Jalora worriedly asked if he was okay after eating the cookies, but he just waved it off and said it was nothing. After that, he suddenly settled down on her lap and quietly said that he would sleep a little. She was a little embarrassed and confused, but still carefully asked if he could rest like this. However, after just a few minutes, the young empress noticed that he had fallen asleep peacefully and quietly on her lap. She touched him carefully and tenderly, but then she became confused, embarrassed by the fact that the great emperor was sleeping so peacefully next to her. The lady took a deep breath, trying to calm her suddenly pounding heart and get her thoughts in order. A moment later, she noticed the books stuck in the crack of the sofa. She carefully took them out and began to read. After a few lines, she froze in shock. Then the lady turned her gaze to her husband. She thought with alarm that her husband was really going to start a war with the neighboring kingdom, her homeland. She was tormented by the thought of what to do: tell the queen everything or keep the terrible secret. At that moment, the empress shuddered, hearing how her husband seemed to begin to wake up, and hastily hid the documents behind her back. But a moment later, Jalora breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that he never woke up. For some time she stared at her sleeping husband. Jalora only quietly hoped that somewhere there was still a way to avoid the coming war. Meanwhile, the duchy was in a state of alarm, as the young lady could not stand what was happening. But the duke patiently tried to calm his hot-tempered daughter. He gently but firmly told her that she should not let her emotions rule her heart. Evelyn could not remain calm, because the emperor, carried away by the empress, seemed to have completely stopped noticing her existence. Then the duke handed his daughter a small letter, hoping that after reading it, she would at least calm down a little. He quietly explained that he had received a letter that the empress had secretly sent to her home kingdom. The duke suggested that secret information about the empire might be hidden inside, and that they would then be able to reveal its true intentions to the emperor. Hearing this, the young lady raised her head, and with a cold, almost cruel smile, remarked that then the emperor could sentence her to death. Opening the letter, the duke said with a grim grin that they might not even have to get their hands dirty. But after reading the line of the letter, both father and daughter suddenly looked at each other in confusion, clearly puzzled by what they saw. Then the duke quietly admitted that he had discovered a completely unexpected side of the emperor. The young lady was filled with rage, not understanding how the emperor could behave so tenderly and caringly toward the empress. In a fit of anger, she furiously tore the letter to shreds, which greatly surprised her father. Evelyn, her voice shaking with rage, declared that tearing up the letter was not enough to satisfy her anger, and reached for her sword. She was seething with anger and was determined to deal with the empress personally. However, the duke stopped his daughter and sternly said that, as his daughter, she could not simply grab a sword and rush into the empress's presence. Evelyn, barely holding back tears and rage, screamed that she had known the emperor for many years, but had never received any nice gifts or attention from him. She bitterly admitted that the emperor never took her to the flower field, although she asked for it countless times. She was shocked that the emperor had willingly shown all this to another woman. Suddenly, her strength left her, and Evelyn fell to her knees, whispering through her tears why the emperor was so cold to her. She was confused and could not understand why his heart was attached to another woman. The duke approached his daughter, trying to console her, because earlier he thought that she was only upset that she had lost the chance to become empress. He knew very well that from a young age she was a proud and stubborn girl. At the same time, the duke understood that if the crown prince were alive, Ceci would become his wife and crown princess. And yet now he was faced with a disturbing question. Did she really love the current emperor, and why hadn't he noticed it before? Even now, the Duke understood that it was not too late to change everything, and they can still eliminate the Empress. He gently reassured his daughter and quietly asked if she remembered what he told her on her birthday. Embracing her tenderly, the Duke quietly repeated that his daughter should have only the best in this world. Giving her a gentle smile, he promised that if she truly loved the Emperor and wanted to become Empress, he would fulfill her wish at any cost. At that moment, the young lady looked at her father with gratitude and a touched smile. She hugged him tightly and quietly said that she really appreciated his support and endless care, and then added that she truly loved him. Some time later, the emperor was informed that the aristocrats were persistently requesting an audience, wishing to discuss with him an important matter concerning the empress herself. The emperor merely chuckled and calmly remarked that it seemed the nobles could not sit still after the information he himself had deliberately spread throughout the palace. Adil, with a mocking smile, asked his comrade what kind of ridiculous lie the stupid nobles would come up with to force him to reject the empress. The young man was taken aback by such a question, but still assumed that perhaps they would declare a secret conspiracy between the empress and the queen of the neighboring kingdom. The emperor laughed loudly and asked his friend sarcastically if he could not come up with a more ingenious and plausible lie. A few moments later, the emperor entered the hall and saw many aristocrats tensely awaiting his appearance and decision. He walked calmly and leisurely to his majestic throne, while the entire hall bowed respectfully before him. Then, settling himself on the throne, he announced in a cold voice that the meeting was officially open. Adil looked carefully at everyone present and said that this time the nobles had gathered together the Duke, after which he asked him what exactly he wanted to tell the emperor. The Duke confidently replied that he indeed had important information concerning the emperor's wife herself. The Duke stated that they had received a letter containing evidence that the empress had revealed the secrets of the empire to a neighboring kingdom. All the aristocrats present immediately began to make noise and were shocked by such a loud accusation. However, the emperor himself merely sat on the throne with a cold, satisfied grin, as if he had expected exactly this turn of events in advance. The emperor looked intently at the Duke and coldly asked him how he was so sure that the letter was really written by the empress's hand. The Duke confidently declared that the emperor would understand everything as soon as he saw the letter with his own eyes, since behind the empress's virtuous appearance hid a person who was supposedly unworthy of trust. Then the emperor calmly ordered his friend to bring him this letter immediately. The Duke respectfully handed over the letter, while anxious whispers and tense conversations among the nobles spread throughout the hall. Adil asked with cold interest whether they already knew the contents of the letter, since they dared to go so far with their accusations. The Duke admitted that at first he did not consider the letter as evidence of a conspiracy, but after reading it, he hastened to appear before the emperor. The emperor noted that it was rather reckless to conclude that the empress had betrayed him based on just one letter. With a cheeky grin, he looked around the room and suggested that everyone present call the empress and ask her questions right there. Some time later, the empress arrived at the meeting, confused and alarmed, not understanding what exactly was happening around her. A moment later, she greeted the emperor respectfully, trying to hide the growing anxiety in her chest. Trembling with fear, she quietly asked what had happened that he had suddenly ordered her to appear at the meeting. Adil stated in a serious and cold voice that the Duke had accused her of conspiring with the neighboring kingdom. Therefore, he intends to personally verify the evidence presented. The Empress was shocked by what she heard and immediately said excitedly that she would never have committed such a betrayal. But at that very moment, her heart sank when she saw in the Emperor's hands the letter that she herself had once sent to the Queen. Adil noticed the worry on his wife's face and calmly asked if this was the same letter she had once sent to the Queen. She sighed heavily and quietly admitted that it really was her letter. Then the Duke triumphantly declared that he had spoken the truth and loudly accused the Empress of hiding a treacherous heart behind her innocent mask. Laura cried out that she had never been in collusion with anyone and quickly began to explain everything about the letter. The Duke looked at her with a cold grin, as if enjoying the way she was trying to justify herself. Jalora was frightened by the Duke's heavy and angry gaze, which pressed on her like a stone wall. But a moment later, she turned to the Emperor and asked if he had read the letter, assuring him that its contents would prove her innocence. The Emperor became angry and sharply declared that she had dared to send a letter to the kingdom without his knowledge. Then he looked menacingly at everyone present and announced that the meeting was over. After this, he approached his wife, who was trembling with fear, and coldly announced that she was temporarily suspended from her post and would not leave the palace without his permission. All the aristocrats were shocked because they had never seen the emperor so angry before. The empress tried to stop him and explain, but he did not even want to listen to her. Then she couldn't stand it any longer and screamed loudly, trying to get his attention back. But in response, there was only a whisper of astonished voices, because for the first time she addressed the emperor simply by his name. Jalora looked after him in confusion, not understanding what she should do to prove her innocence. In desperation, she announced that she would read the letter out loud in front of everyone right then and there. The emperor immediately stopped and turned around in surprise, looking at her carefully. The duke watched this with a satisfied grin, confident that the empress had fallen into his trap. She felt painfully awkward reading such lines in front of a crowd, but she could not allow her husband to think badly of her. However, when she opened the letter, she froze in horror. After all, the content turned out to be completely different, although the handwriting undoubtedly belonged to her. The duke came closer and, with a mocking smile, asked what had happened and why she had suddenly become silent. Then he abruptly snatched the letter from her hands and declared that he would read it himself since she was too upset. Jalora realized that any explanation she gave now would sound like empty excuses, and the emperor might not believe them. At the same time, she saw all the glances that pierced her. The emperor approached her and sternly asked if she still had no excuse. She quietly said that she herself did not understand how it happened. After all, the handwriting was definitely hers, but the content of the letter turned out to be different. The emperor coldly asked if she was trying to imply that someone had forged the letter by copying her handwriting. At this point, the duke intervened and loudly declared that the empress was simply lying. Then the emperor looked sharply at the duke and reminded him that he himself had admitted that he had already read the letter before. This meant that the duke had the opportunity to replace it before showing it to the emperor. The duke was confused and hastily declared that he had done nothing of the sort. He insisted that he had found the letter by chance and would have gained nothing by destroying the relationship between the imperial family and the kingdom. After this, the duke added that he had been hearing disturbing rumors about the empress for a long time. He loudly declared that she was treacherous and knew how to use tears as a weapon to mislead people. The aristocrats understood that the emperor was not one to be easily deceived, but the duke's evidence looked extremely dubious. The emperor calmly asked his wife if she had any evidence that the letter was forged. Then Adil turned to the duke and noted that he also had no proof that the letter had not been tampered with. The duke was at a loss, as he had not expected to hear such words from the emperor. Adil looked at him sternly and demanded a clear answer. The duke sighed heavily, and the emperor coldly declared that both sides contradicted each other and no one had evidence. Therefore, he stated that the matter required a thorough investigation. Leaving the hall, the emperor added that the empress was temporarily suspended from her duties. He also warned that if she was found guilty, she would be punished according to the law. The emperor then asked the duke if he had any objections. The duke, beaming with satisfaction, declared that he fully agreed with the decision. After some time, only the spouses remained in the hall, and the young empress stood confused, not knowing what to do next. She was taken aback when her husband approached her. Suddenly, the emperor gently hugged her, which left her completely stunned. Adil looked at her with slight sadness and quietly asked if she really believed that he was saying all this seriously. He also noted that her attempt to read such a personal letter in front of a crowd was reckless. Jalora was stunned and did not understand how he knew the contents of the letter if he had not read it. She was extremely surprised by his words. The emperor smiled and said that he and his assistant had checked the letter long ago and knew what was written in it. The empress was shocked by such a confession and did not expect that he had known the truth all this time. The emperor then added with a smile that his assistant had called the letter a true love letter. Laura blushed with embarrassment and quickly asked him to shut up, not wanting to hear about it anymore. Adil, with a slight sly smile, asked why she had secretly sent the queen a letter full of warm feelings, intended only for him. Jalora looked away in embarrassment and quietly said that this was not a love letter at all. She just wanted to write to her mother that the emperor was really kind to her. She admitted that she did it because her mother always considered him a cruel and merciless tyrant. The emperor looked at his wife in surprise and thoughtfully asked if she really thought that a few sincere lines could change the queen's mind. Jlora, still blushing with embarrassment, quietly asked how he had managed to get her letter in the first place. He only smiled mysteriously and said that all this became possible thanks to her own gossip. The Empress frowned in confusion and asked if he was talking about her servant. He told her that her maid had accidentally found the letter and began to read it aloud. Elon caught her doing this and, having finished reading, carefully handed the documents to the Emperor. After the story, she understood why he acted this way. For this reason, she realized that he had never doubted her for a second from the very beginning and already knew the contents of the letter. But she was puzzled that it all turned out to be a lie, designed to blacken her name. The Emperor looked closely at his wife and declared that she had done nothing of the sort. And yet there was another reason why he could say with certainty that the letter was a fake. Adil stated that the person who forged the letter was his subordinate. The Empress was extremely shocked. Then he added with a grin that the Duke and the other nobles had not taken part in this. Looking at his wife with a predatory gaze, he declared that he would like to hear about the letter from her. Jalora looked away and stated that he must have expected this. She realized that if she tried to tell the queen about the contents of the letter, he would immediately find out about everything. Meanwhile, the maid paced nervously from corner to corner, knowing that her mistress would never collaborate with the enemy. She was shocked when she saw the Emperor dragging his wife. She rushed towards them and tried to call the Emperor, but the knight stopped her, blocking her path. Then the Emperor looked menacingly at everyone present and declared that during his imprisonment, no one should approach the Empress's palace. He quickly pulled her into the room despite the intense stares. Everyone was puzzled and worried about the Empress because they saw that the Emperor was angry and could not control his emotions. Marie stared at the closed door and hoped that her mistress would be okay. Jalora, puffing out her beautiful cheek, asked the Emperor to give her a little rest. He looked at her with a smile and declared that he hadn't even started reading the best part yet. The Empress was extremely embarrassed and ran hastily to her husband to take the secret letter. But unfortunately, she couldn't hold on and fell with a crash onto her husband. Adil looked at her in surprise and asked if she really wanted to shut him up. She was embarrassed and replied that all he did was tease her. Adil simply stated that he couldn't stop enjoying her reaction, while also throwing a few more barbed remarks in her direction. The Empress could not resist and kissed him. But a moment later, she pulled back and declared that this should have shut his mouth. Adil looked at his wife with a satisfied smile and declared that she was the one who started it all. Then he sharply twisted her and thus threw her off himself. Adil, in a fit of passion, slowly began to undress. Thus, he caught the Empress by surprise and saw her extremely embarrassed face. She was taken aback and declared that everyone was right outside the room and that it was a very bad idea. She froze for a moment, waiting for him to continue. But when she opened her eyes, she saw the Emperor's mocking smile, and he asked for forgiveness for giving her hope. Adil sighed heavily and declared that he really wanted to get closer to her more than anything in the world. But she was suspect, and if he stayed in the room long enough, she would start talking. Jalora looked away from him with an offended expression and asked why he had taken off his clothes. Then the Emperor tenderly touched her face and called her to him. He smiled and stated that when he teased her, he thought she was cute. Without wasting a minute, he tenderly kissed his wife. Then the young Empress asked her husband what he was going to do with the Duke and other nobles. He stated that she need not worry, as he intended to deal with them properly. Laura hugged her husband tenderly and said that she was grateful to him, but if there was anything he could do to help, he should tell her about it. He smiled and said that he would certainly do so. After some time, the Emperor's subordinates told him about ways to prove the Empress's innocence. Casus, in turn, stated that they had to act covertly so as not to reveal their spy. At the same time, he proposed an excellent plan of action. The Emperor declared that he would do nothing that would put them at a disadvantage. For this reason, he wanted to make a deal with the Duke that he could not refuse. The young man sighed heavily and declared that he understood everything. Casus also asked if they would continue to monitor the Empress. At that very moment, the Emperor froze and remembered his wife, who looked at him with tears in her eyes and admitted her innocence. He smiled and stated that he had decided to trust his wife, because after all, they were not strangers. That same evening, the Emperor met with the Duke and asked him how he would explain the letter. He wanted to hear that the Duke had not really replaced him. The Duke nervously stated that he had no memory of anything like that at all. But at the same time, he was puzzled and did not understand where the Emperor got something like that from. Adil looked at the Duke with a grin and asked if he really didn't remember something like that. He also invited the man in and asked the Duke if he knew him. The Duke stood frozen for a moment, stunned. Then the man bowed and greeted them. He was a scribe. The Duke was frightened and did not understand why the man was in such a place. The Emperor turned to his subordinate with a smile and asked him to remind the Duke about the letter. The man stated that a few days ago the Duke came to him holding scraps of a letter in his hands and threatened to write a new one from dictation. The Duke was shocked because he understood that he was lost, but at the same time he shouted that he had not given such an order. At that very moment he fell to his knees and told the Emperor that the man had tried to slander him, since he had done nothing of the sort. But he understood that a not very pleasant end awaited him. The Emperor approached the Duke and stated that he knew that he had been appropriating money and mineral resources for himself over the past few years. He looked menacingly at the man and asked if he had really done anything like that. The Duke was frightened. He did not understand how much the Emperor knew about this. He understood that he could die that very minute, but he knew that he had a daughter whom he loved very much and did not want her to lose her life, so he began to beg for forgiveness. The Emperor smiled and stated that the man should not panic, as there was a small reason why he called him. He just wanted to help him. Adil stated that according to the laws, accusing the Empress of a crime was a serious offense. He explained that usually the title and property were taken away, and the nobleman became an ordinary person. Adil, with a fierce grin, declared that he could soften this punishment. The Duke was taken aback, as he did not expect such a thing. The Emperor then approached the man and declared that they would officially announce that the letter of conspiracy was a simple misunderstanding caused by the Duke's poor investigation. The Emperor said that in exchange, as an apology, the Duke should hand over the rights to extract minerals within the Empire's territory. The Duke froze in shock, as he had not expected such a thing. But at that very moment, he realized that the Emperor was well aware that this mine was very rich in iron ore. The Emperor looked menacingly at the man and asked if he was unhappy with his proposal. The Duke was taken aback and thanked the Emperor for the convenient offer and also apologized for what he had done. That same evening, he returned home, where his daughter was already meeting him. At the same time, Evelyn looked at her father with excitement, wanting to know if the Emperor had really taken his wife's side. The Duke shouted and asked his daughter to be quiet, because he was almost killed for what he had done. As he left, he sighed heavily and asked his daughter not to talk about the Empress for a while. The young lady was furious because she realized that her father had failed, and now she will have to solve the problem herself. After some time, everyone was preparing for the gala party, and the Empress prepared everyone carefully. Jalora never thought that preparing for a party would be so difficult. Marie said with a smile that there was nothing complicated, because she intended to help her mistress. Overjoyed, the maid began to do her job, but a moment later she was taken aback, as she had completely forgotten to take new cream. She asked for forgiveness and told the lady that she would return soon. The Empress tried to stop the maid, but to no avail. She wondered what her husband was doing now. At the same time, she understood that he didn't need to dress up as much as she did. A moment later, she heard her husband's voice, smiling, saying that everything was right. The young Empress did not expect to meet him in such a place, and, taken aback, she rose slightly, appearing to him in a very piquant form. Not understanding what he was looking at, he stated with a smile that he had come for her and noticed that the door was open, so he assumed she was taking a bath. Then he looked at his wife and was stunned, as he saw her in an intimate way. The young lady was taken aback, as she realized that she had made a mistake, and at that very moment plunged into the water. Then the Emperor, with noticeable embarrassment and a slight tremor in his voice, timidly asked his wife to put on clothes. Laura quickly looked around and felt a surge of panic. All her change of clothes were left in the bathhouse, and only the Emperor's shirt was nearby. She understood that she had no choice, and with trembling hands, as if ashamed of herself, she carefully put on her clothes. Everything inside was seething with embarrassment, and every movement seemed deafeningly revealing. The Emperor froze for a moment, completely stunned, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and overwhelming desire washing over him. He saw his wife in a piquant form that was both beautiful and seductive, and a feeling of excitement and trepidation completely took over his mind. He looked at his wife with embarrassment and immediately declared that this outfit was actually worse than before. She froze in shock. Her heart was beating so fast that she could hardly breathe, because she did not expect this. Then the emperor suddenly pounced on her and began to give her passionate kisses, his lips greedily touching hers, and his arms hugged me so tightly that it seemed he would never let go. At this point, the empress announced with alarm and excitement that the party would soon begin. But passion was already raging within him, so he did not pay the slightest attention to her words, completely dissolving in her. Adel continued to kiss her with tenderness and passion, and the empress, embarrassed, but with secret trepidation, did not resist. A moment later, a maid entered the room and happily announced that she had brought everything. Noticing their almost forbidden closeness, she was momentarily taken aback by the sight of the gentleman in such piquant proximity. But what struck her most was that the emperor left a hickey on her neck on such an important day. After some time, the maid scolded the newlyweds, as she knew that the emperor could indulge in pranks even after the party. After all, she now had to work hard to hide the trace of passion left by him. The emperor was embarrassed and slightly ashamed of his actions. That same evening, everyone was eagerly awaiting the emperor and empress in the banquet hall. A moment later, Bas, the young couple got ready and went to the banquet. All the aristocrats present whispered to each other as they watched them. They said that the couple was truly perfect for each other, while Evelyn looked at the empress with fury. She was beside herself, realizing that it was she who should have stood next to the emperor. But now she saw the spouses looking at each other with tenderness. After this, she was overcome with rage. But she understood that the empress's innocent smile would soon be wiped from her face. She wanted to deal with the girl as soon as possible. After some time, the newlyweds looked at each other tenderly and danced beautifully, opening the banquet. Everyone present admired them, while Evelyn, holding back her rage, watched them. While they were dancing, the lady quietly left the hall. She slowly approached the small cup with the drink, and quietly poured into it the juice of the datura flower, which causes strong hallucinations. She knew that if the emperor drank it, he would become enraged and might harm his beloved empress. This caused her to chuckle slightly. After some time, all those present raised their glasses to the newlyweds. They were happy, but there was a lot of awkward conversation at the table. The emperor looked away at his wife, as she was behaving very quietly. He saw that his wife was worried about something. Then he could not stand it any longer and angrily put the cup of wine on the table. He looked at everyone intently and asked menacingly if they had forgotten that the neighboring kingdom was the empress's homeland. After the emperor's menacing look, all those present quickly lowered their eyes and asked the empress for forgiveness. She smiled softly and stated that they didn't need to worry about such things. Her lady watched attentively and felt the tension in the room gradually dissipate. Adel looked at his wife with a tender smile and declared that the aristocrats had become arrogant because they had drunk too much. Jalora sighed and said that everything was fine because they were telling the truth and her kingdom was defeated. The emperor tenderly embraced his wife and added that she did not need to worry because she was still the empress. He said quietly that she was also his wife, and the young lady felt relieved by these words. She was pleased to hear this. She felt a slight warmth spread through her soul. Then the emperor warned that other nobles would soon arrive and might say something unpleasant, so he suggested a short walk. A walk could dispel the accumulated fatigue and thoughts. The empress agreed and went to her servant, but she noticed that she was chatting cheerfully with the knight, so she decided to go for a walk herself. Meanwhile, Evelyn grinned and told her friends that the empress had left and they should greet her properly. After some time, the empress came out onto a small balcony. The empress was lost in her thoughts, but not for long. To her surprise, she was not alone. The ladies followed her and greeted her. They bowed with a smile and introduced themselves. Jalora smiled and said that they could communicate more freely. The ladies remarked mockingly that she was indeed good-natured and did not look like a princess at all. They clarified that they wanted her to understand their words correctly and not be offended. She looked away, full of sadness, and declared that everything was fine. She knew perfectly well that she was not a real princess, and she knew that if anyone found out about it, she would be in trouble. The ladies said mockingly that they did not expect her to become so close to the emperor. They added that Evelyn would become empress because the emperor had loved her since childhood, hiding his feelings for the sake of his elder brother. And the empress was shocked by such words. The ladies assured her that this was natural, since he would not have told her directly. The young lady couldn't believe them, but as she put the facts together, she felt uneasy. She understood that there was some truth in their words. She suggested that the emperor planted the flower field for his first love. The ladies watched the empress with mockery because their plan worked. Jalora glared menacingly, realizing that they had deliberately made her jealous so that the emperor would hate her. Jalora sighed heavily and thanked them for what they had said. Then she admitted that she envied the young lady because she grew up under a different emperor. They looked at the empress with puzzlement. She hoped to become friends with Evelyn, considering her a good person. The conversation was interrupted when the knight burst in and reported that something irreparable had happened. The emperor was furious. He said that the emperor was furious, and there was confusion in the hall. The empress was shocked because before this, everything had been calm. Meanwhile, the banquet hall was in chaos. Everyone was running in terror while the emperor held the man hostage. The emperor swung his sword, preparing to strike. The empress was in shock because recently everything had been fine, but now there was panic. Cesis noticed the empress, rushed to her, and warned her that the emperor was out of control and that she should not come near. Jalora froze in place, looking at the emperor, unaware that she was already being hunted. A moment later, someone pushed her, and she flew with a crash into the center of the hall. The young empress fell to the ground and, coming to, saw the emperor above her. She trembled with fear as she sat on the floor in front of the emperor, who held his sword ready for action. For a while, she sat shrouded in fear, looking at her husband. A moment later, the imperial laughter broke through the tension, and his gaze burned the empress, leaving bitter pain and shock in her heart. She stood there, frozen, immersed in horror, wondering if this moment would bring her the most terrible loss of all, her own life. Madame looked sternly at the girls, reminding them that nobility is not only a title, but also unwavering manners under any circumstances. Rage poured into her movements as she hit the young student who had not let her guard down. For sleeping in class was unacceptable. The young lady, her eyes wet with tears, felt the injustice of what was happening and internally protested against the accusations that were suffocating her. Jalora approached Madame meekly, her heart pounding with shame, and she took the blame to protect the innocent and keep peace in the classroom. At that moment, she stretched out her hands, preparing to accept the punishment, feeling her heart squeeze with fear and anticipation of pain. Madame was overcome by a fierce sense of justice. The girl should not have been punished, and she took responsibility for the mistake upon herself, intending to correct the order. Jalora froze, tears welling up in her eyes as she realized the gravity of the situation, and desperately tried to humbly ask for forgiveness. After some time, she came to her friend, holding sweets in her hands as a symbol of sincere repentance and an attempt to atone for her guilt. But the girl flared up with anger and sharply pushed the lady away, showing that simple apologies were not enough for her, and the sweets were unnecessary. Jalora was left shocked, feeling the blows of words and looks full of anger and contempt. Realizing that the desire to correct the situation was futile. Her life was filled with loneliness and hardship, but inside there lived a quiet hope to find someone she could trust and open up to. Laura humbly understood that her desires were too bold, and that she was not allowed to strive for anything more than the strict boundaries of fate. Her heart sank with longing. She only dreamed of having someone nearby who could understand her soul and respond with mutual warmth. At that very moment, the channel lit up as her husband appeared before her, his eyes expressing surprise and quiet concern, asking about her tears. The emperor, with a faint smile, gently made it clear that if she kept her feelings secret, there was no need to tell him about them. He simply extended his warm hand, inviting her to come closer, and her heart fluttered, feeling his care without words or pressure. He smiled, assuring her that he had always been there and that she would not be afraid, and that if she took his hand, he would pull her out of any trouble. At that very moment, the empress, her heart filled with joy, ran to meet her husband, leaving her fears behind, in the radiance of a smile. A moment later, she came to her senses, realizing that her husband seemed to have disappeared, leaving behind emptiness and a slight panic in her soul. She understood that she couldn't leave everything as it was. She couldn't allow fate to control her heart without resistance. With a tender smile and tears on her cheeks, the young empress extended her hands to her husband, as if embodying hope and trust at the same time. The emperor, returning to reality, froze in place, amazed and stunned by her courage and sincere feelings. He jerked away from his wife, realizing that he had accidentally caused her a deep and painful wound that filled him with horror. Laura met her husband's gaze with relief, glad that his mind had returned and he understood the consequences of his actions. After some time, the young man carefully treated the Empress's wound. His hands were shaking, but concern for her prevailed over his fear. Then he asked the Emperor to stay with his wife in the evening, wanting her to feel safe. The Emperor sighed heavily, reluctantly agreeing, although his eyes hid inner conflict and anxiety. A few minutes later, they were left alone, and he slowly approached his wife, peering intently into her face, trying to understand her intentions. He was puzzled. Why did she approach a monster like him when she could have simply left, like everyone else did? The Empress looked closely at her husband, seeing that he was still trembling, and realized that fear still possessed him. With a slight smile, she noted that this was the first time she had seen him in such a state, revealing an unexpected and intimate moment of his vulnerability. At the same time, she knew that his assistant was trying to stop her, but courage and determination prevailed over obstacles. Finally, the crowd pushed her forward, and she collapsed right in front of her husband, her heart beating in time with excitement and fear. Laura looked at him with a gentle smile, promising that if the attack repeated, she would rush to meet him without hesitation. The Emperor was struck by her words, but immediately responded with a hug that filled them both with warmth and safety. As he hugged her, he gently warned her that if something like this happened again, her main concern should be saving herself. Jalora confidently stated that as his wife, she would face any difficulties with him, sharing all trials shoulder to shoulder. He was afraid that he would lose control and accidentally hurt her, and his heart sank with anxiety. Jalora looked at him with a soft smile, assuring him that everything would be okay because she trusted him completely. He smiled back, admitting that sometimes he didn't know what was on her mind and wanted her to open up more of herself to him. Did you like the recap? Want a continuation? Write part 2 in the comments. In